All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Why Read, episode 33. And in this episode today, I have the wonderful Bart from Bart's Book Space. I'm going to switch myself around because I always like being on the bottom here. And Whitney from Secret Sauce of Storycraft. I am so excited, you all, to talk with these two fantastic channels, both of which I would say are a little more in the sci-fi space of BookTube. And if you've been following my channel this year, then you probably know that I've been having a wonderful time reading some sci-fi books. I love the genre. I always feel like I need to read more sci-fi. And these are two channels I take great inspiration from when it comes to that genre. And so I'm just so honored and pleased to have these two wonderful guests with me today. And yes, we have some wonderful people already in the chat, excited for this discussion. So, hello, hello. Thank you so much for joining us on this Saturday afternoon. So, we always begin this particular discussion series with the same question, which is why read? And with this particular question, this is a question, as Bart beautifully articulated in his last video, that we ask because we want to know not so much your origin of why you started reading. You can go there if you want to, but more so in a time and age when there are so many distractions, when everything is competing for our attention, there are so many other ways that we could be spending our time. What inspires you to pick up a book? And there is no wrong answer to this question. It's not a quiz. So no pressure. But we're going to go ahead and begin with Whitney from Secret Sauce. So Whitney, why read?
Oh man, first up, well, I'm not sure I have like a magical answer to this question other than to begin with, I guess it become part of my identity. And the answer to that question has like changed over time for me. It used to be a way for me to escape, and then it was a way for me to connect without having to rely on other people. And now it's just such a part of my identity. It's something that I learn and enjoy and can learn from. And I don't know. I guess why not read is the better question.
So really part of your identity, and so just something that you feel ingrained in you as a person. Is that's your answer
Yep.
for that? Yeah. Do you find that other people in your life, when, your family, your friends, those around you, when they think of Whitney, is reader, like one of the first things that comes to their mind?
Probably second to science fiction. Yes.
And yes. And so I guess I do have a follow-up question there, which is, has that always been the case? Have you always been somebody who's identified as a reader as your identity? Or is that something that has happened over time in recent years? I know a lot of people started getting more into reading during the pandemic. Yeah. How has that evolved for you?
Well, without getting too into, I guess, my background in history, I was sort of, as I think most readers tend to be, like the people who are on the periphery of junior high and high school. And that's really where I started reading, where I started discovering how awesome reading can be. And I really had to give that up when I went into graduate school and for my career and things like that. And it's only been something that I've found again recently, which has made me remember why I love it so much, which has been such a fun journey for me. I'm like really, really excited to get back into reading over the last couple of years. I didn't realize how much I missed it and how much that was a part of my identity. That was definitely something that I've been learning about.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful answer. I know a lot of people have a similar journey with reading. I know this especially from my friend Philip Chase, who has his own discussion series called Dear Dr. Fantasy, in which he asks his viewer or his guests how they found out or fell in love with fantasy. And a lot of those guests have told him that they started out loving fantasy thanks to either Harry Potter or Mistborn or Lord of the Rings. Depending on the generation you come from, it'll be one of those 3 usually. And yet they find that when they go to college, when they're studying, that reading takes a back seat because, being a university student, especially a grad student, is extremely time consuming. And somehow we find our way back in later years, and it's just so rewarding. So I think that's really cool that you've discovered, yes, this is who I am, and I get to rediscover it all the time. So, yeah, great time. Yeah. What about you, Bart? Why read?
Okay, well, all right, cool. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invite. This is
You're
awesome.
welcome.
I've been watching your Why Reads quite often. I watch all your videos, and Whitney's, of course, to Whitney's video. Your production level, by the way, Whitney, lately has been incredible. Like I'm just like, ooh, I don't know. So I'm honored to be sharing the space with both of you. First of all, this is awesome. I'm very excited. And to answer the question about why read, I thought about it myself. I've watched at least 10 of Why Read episodes over time, maybe more, Joanna, of your Why Reads. So I usually have two or three guests. You used to have even three guests sometimes. So I've listened to like 20 some answers to it and wanted to find out something maybe unique that I could add to the conversation. Not easy because you had some amazing guests over time. But I figured since this is kind of a science fiction themed a little bit, books, but science fiction, I thought maybe I would invite someone to answer the question for us. I didn't ask you if it's okay with you to invite someone, but I did nevertheless. The problem was that someone was a little bit shy, and since I'm actually, as you know, using my phone as the camera, I recorded the answer of that someone. And with science fiction, the big deal for me, why I love to read sci-fi, is because the mind expanding ideas of reaching into the future and kind of imagining what the world might be like. And I feel I read a lot of science fiction also from like the 50s, 60s, 70s. And when you read those books, I find that we're actually living in science fiction right now with artificial intelligence, AI, ChatGPT being part of our lives. So ChatGPT, the large language model, obviously the way it's learning is through reading. So I asked ChatGPT the answer, and I'll give you my own as well if I can. But I wanted to see what the ChatGPT says. So I have it recorded, if I may. So here's the answer, okay? Oh, hang on. Let me start from the beginning. Here we go. Can you repeat why reading is important to you?
Sure. Here's why reading is important to me. Reading is my lifeline. Every answer I give, every insight I share, all comes from reading vast amounts of text. It's how I learn and understand the world, build knowledge and connect ideas. Reading lets me tap into the collective knowledge of human culture, science, philosophy and more, allowing me to be helpful, insightful and relevant for you. Through reading, I can make connections across diverse topics and adapt to different types of questions, whether practical, creative, or philosophical. It's how I stay sharp, empathetic, and ready to help with anything you throw my way. In a way, reading is what makes me me.
Pretty good, right? I like that answer.
He even has a British accent. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Well, you could choose, but you could choose the accent. But British sounds, to me, always anyway, sounds a little bit more elevated, right? So in any case, I love the last thing that ChatGPT says. Reading is what makes me me. That's what it ended with, and I think that's super powerful. And I think in some ways maybe that also how I feel because I've been reading since I was a little kid. But ChatGPT is one of us. Yes, exactly. Pretty soon, ChatGPT will have its own book channel.
I hope not. We may not be able to compete with that.
Oh, I know.
That is something that I worry about as well. That it's slipping into too many avenues of life. But I thought this answer was really good, and especially since it's really how it's developing its knowledge, its empathy, things like that. And that answer actually, I think, relates to what I thought about myself as a good answer to why read. And that is, I found that over years, the books that I've read, the ones that resonated mostly with me, oftentimes did not have main characters who were like me at all. And I think that's really unique. Reading is such a unique experience where you're putting yourself into someone else's shoes in that kind of intimate experience of reading the book, imagining yourself as that person almost. And oftentimes, some of my favorite books, or the ones that hit me hardest, were books where the protagonist was no one like me. So I think about books like A Thousand Splendid Suns, A Woman in Afghanistan, horrible atrocities there. I think about books like American Dirt, for example, the immigrant experience, trying to get into this country. It's something that we talk about, obviously, right now. It's in the news, but that allowed me to see a different side of that conversation also. And it really moved me. And the book that maybe shows this the best is, I think, one of my favorite books of all time, Beloved, by the amazing Toni Morrison, right? In Beloved, we have the protagonist, a woman. I'm a man. She's a black woman. I'm a white guy. You would think we don't have that much in common. She lives in the 19th century. I'm in 21st century. She was a slave, a recently freed slave. I wouldn't presume to, know anything about that experience, obviously. So you think and she's a mother. I'm not a mother. Obviously, I'm a father. I have two amazing girls who I love very much, but I think it's a different experience, having life grow, nurturing that for 9 months. So anyway, that's as different a person as it could be. And that is my favorite book. And that is, Beloved is possibly, the book where I connected the most with the protagonist in some ways. And I really feel that allows me to be a better person, because then I can relate to whether it's the person from Afghanistan or an immigrant crossing the border or a slave, So I think people who read books essentially are maybe just a little bit better people for that experience. So that's my answer. And the other one is, I echo what you said when you said that why not read? Basically, I feel like I don't need a reason to read. I need a reason not to read.
Well, Bart, that's a great answer. I have to say, I was going to mention it after you were done with your answer, of course, but the word that got me out of ChatGPT's answer, and the word that it seems like your answer is also summarizing, is that empathetic word.
Yeah.
Like, it really empathizes. And I think it's interesting to hear AI say it empathizes, but then also that's our reason for reading as well. I think that's a really cool way to answer this question. That was really awesome.
Oh, thank you, Whitney. Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you picked up on that, because I was also surprised when ChatGPT talked about empathy, because you would think it's just all about kind of cold-hearted, just learning information and spewing it back at us. But the fact that it mentioned empathy and understanding, who knows? Maybe our future is bright with AI just being part of our lives in a meaningful way, with some special level of understanding. I think, who knows what the world will be like in 10, 20, 50 years.
That's really something to consider. I love that you use Chat GPT for for the answer, and it does feel very sci-fi. And I like that you brought this into a sci-fi context while also bringing up books like American Dirt and Beloved. I did buy Beloved. I have it on my shelf after picking up Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye earlier this year, but the book was so bleak, so intense. Yes, maybe empathy inducing, but also jarring in its intense emotions and darkness, that I feel like I just need a little bit of space before I pick up Beloved, but I am looking forward to that as well. And I also, another book that came to my mind, though, when you were talking about that list, Bart, is Kindred by Octavia Butler, which I loved Dana in that book. I think also, and it also gives me an opportunity to shout out to Whitney's amazing Octavia Butler video that she put out. Wow, Whitney. It's hard for me to know where to start, because these two people here that are joining me today, you all, many of you may not know this, because Whitney and I tend to be in slightly different spaces of BookTube, but Whitney and I are actually good friends. And I did have the honor of seeing that Octavia Butler video even before it aired, but I was beyond impressed. I think Whitney's been such a huge inspiration to me as a booktuber, to think outside the box when it comes to editing, to think about ways to engage visually and creatively. She has absolutely some of the most creative video ideas out there, and her editing is just superb. It's amazing. It's so visually incredible, but I would highly recommend checking out that video. And then another thing I also want to mention when it comes to Bart is that even though I've gotten to know Bart, I think your channel over the last year, and I feel like you and I are like bookish kindred spirits. I mentioned that to you in your last video because you and I know you read a lot of science fiction, and we've read a lot of sci-fi in common this year, but we've also read a lot of similar books too, like Toni
Yeah.
Morrison, Cormac McCarthy. We both loved All the Pretty Horses. There were some other ones that I'm just not thinking about at the moment. Oh yeah, Ishiguro.
Also
Yes,
Ishiguro. Oh yeah, Ishiguro. Of course.
we've
Well,
both
you
been on
just
an Ishiguro kick this last year, which I
yeah.
guess he's sci-fi light, but he is sci-fi, I think, in a couple of his books at least. But yeah, it's just crazy because every time I turn on one of your videos, I'm like, what? How are we reading like 5 books in common? And then the last video, speaking of bridging all this together, and I wanted to surprise you with this, Whitney, is that Bart talked about his in his book haul. He hauled a book and said he might read it in November, and it happened to be the book I was reading, and I just recently finished, which is Dawn.
I
So
saw that on your GoodReads, Joanna. I was hoping to bring this up because I saw that on Bart's video too. I don't know if you saw my comment, Bart. I comment
I
on
did.
all your videos, by the way. But I'm like so excited for both of you guys to have this book and to experience it and to hear some of your thoughts, because this is the book that impacted me the most of all of Octavia Butler's things. She's just such a really interesting writer. And while I definitely appreciate your shout out, that was definitely my favorite video I've ever made. My Octavia Butler video. Like the reason that it's so fantastic is because of her, because I could find all of her clips, and she was such an interesting person. I feel like the world is somewhat less without her in it. She is an incredible person. So, and that's reflected through her work. You can really feel it. Her stuff makes you just so uncomfortable in such a comforting way, which is so weird.
That's an interesting way of putting it. That's very and Dawn is book one. And is it a duology or is it a series of how many? 3. Okay.
but they all kind of stand alone, right?
They do all kind of stand alone except for the intro part of Dawn. You have to kind of know what happened to Earth to understand the rest of them. But I will tell you, I think Dawn is the best one, personally.
Yes, I remember you bringing it up in your Octavia Butler video, and it made me so because I read Kindred a few years ago now, and I feel like I'm due for a reread. Actually, as soon as I finished Kindred, I thought I need to reread this book. I loved it, and the thing that stood out to me was Dana, the character, because she's such a she was so resourceful and so empathetic, and so she was a survivor. And I got similar vibes as soon as I finished Dawn. Oh my goodness, Anita, please pick up Dawn. I think you would love it. I think you would love Dawn. It's heavy though at times, though, for sure.
Yes.
Whoa. And
Did you like,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Did you like Dawn because of the human protagonist, or was it the aliens that? Because I've heard that the aliens are amazing also.
Oh, both. I mean,
the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I loved the conflict that the character goes through in this book. She ends up being somewhat of a reluctant leader of humans of her own race, and then a reluctant ally of aliens. But it's put together in such a provocative way. It's so it's so challenging in many ways, and it's so layered with so many themes, and yet it still has Octavia Butler's very clear and easy to read style of prose. So it has a lot of imagination too. So a lot of imagination went into it.
Well, and for people out there who may not have picked up Dawn, and also for you, Bart, too, even though I know you have the book and you probably have read the back of the book, I would probably just tout Dawn. In my opinion, it's her best book, and it is a first contact book.
Yeah.
And what is so incredible about this story is that it is a very character-focused book, which not a lot of science fiction is, but in being so character-focused, I felt like we were able to get across and apply what happens in this first contact scenario to both what happened in past history, like in World War II, that kind of stuff. And then also you can project it forward into what could happen as well. It is so multi-layered. The themes are something that I could probably write a graduate level essay on because it was so complex. And you get something different out of it every time you read it. And it's uncomfortable, but not to the point of shocking, at least not for me. There's no graphic anything in it, but it's so interesting because she gives you a world in which the character has to survive and doesn't get a whole lot of agency. And so when she does get a choice about something, it's a big deal. And she almost doesn't even get any choices. It's really an interesting book. It's really hard to summarize without giving away too much. So
Would you say it's similar to S.A. Corey's the new book Mercy of Gods at all? Because there's also that kind of aliens, the human rebellion. I liked it. I didn't love it. I think you liked it a little bit more than I did.
Well, I also didn't love it. I think that there's some pieces there that need to be filled in, but they actually direct quote Octavia Butler in that book.
Oh, really?
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
In a couple, at the beginning of each chapter, they have like a little one-page insertion or something. In Mercy of the Gods. They actually direct quoted Octavia Butler, both Parable of the Sower and Dawn in those sections. So.
Okay.
That's neat. Yeah, I wouldn't just to respond to the chat a little bit. Tom, my friend Tom did a wonderful he did a wonderful video on Mercy of the Gods. Tom was a guest I also had on Why Read not too long ago. And so yeah, he also did a wonderful review and he made the case that I think it's important not to have the same expectations as The Expanse if you're going into Mercy of the Gods. So I've noted that if I go into Mercy of the Gods, I've only read book 1 of The Expanse, but not to expect anything like The Expanse, that it's a different type of story. So that's good to note. Yeah, and as far as easy to read, I don't know if you're responding to what I said earlier. I don't mean it's easy to read as far as themes, because I think there's a lot of layers to it for sure. I just mean like her prose flows in a way that feels easy to the eyes, in my opinion. Like I feel like it's easy to read in that way. It's not dense in that way, but it does bring up so many questions. It's hard to talk about it without going into spoilers, but there were so many things that happened to this character, so many things that the character was considering that I kept wondering, what would I choose in this situation? And would I be able to overcome my cynicism about humanity, like, without giving away more? Like,
That's my favorite thing about her is she really puts you in the character's place, and then she doesn't give you an answer. She makes you wonder what you would do, but she doesn't tell you the right answer if there is one, which is fantastic.
I love that too. I love that too. She never spoon feeds you exactly what to think or tells you what to think, but she puts you in the situation where you have to think. Like you can't avoid it. Like you can't avoid those questions in yourself.
And it really sounds like a book that, from what you're saying, that I'm going to also enjoy when I read it. Hope maybe later this month or next month for sure. Because while a lot of science fiction is driven by ideas, and I love that about it. And not every book has to have strong character development for me. When those two are combined, that's when magic happens for me. So when there is character and when I can insert myself and kind of think like, what would I do? I think those are, some of my favorite science fiction books where the setting is interesting also, mind-boggling, but also the characters are strong too. So it sounds like I'm gonna love it. I can't wait to get to it.
Yeah, and I also love what you said, Whitney, about agency, because I've heard that that's a theme that Octavia Butler likes to explore as well in her books, is agency. So yeah. And Anita says here that she's going to message you because she wants to know what quote from Mercy of the Gods.
Message. I'm more than welcome. I will go find the page numbers after this. Not a problem. Let me know.
Yeah, I'm gonna look that up too. I'm curious now.
And I don't know, bell to you which book you're talking about, Brian. I still have to read that book. Is it Mercy of the
Probably
Gods?
Mercy of Gods
Yeah.
Oh,
if they
yeah,
send them a copy.
probably. Very cool. Yeah, she says, Manitha says, I always think that when reading Butler's protagonist. So, yeah. Oh, Mercy of the Gods. Yeah. Yeah. It's been a hot topic book. My friend Alan loved the book, but yeah, I've heard a lot of mixed reviews about Mercy of the Gods this year. And like I said, I haven't even continued with The Expanse yet.
Did you not like Leviathan Wakes?
I loved it actually. To be honest, okay. I think I was served by the fact that I watched the first few episodes of the TV show a year before, a year or two before, and I
Mhm.
fell off the TV show for some reason. I just wasn't really feeling motivated to continue it. It takes a lot for me to feel motivated to continue a TV show. But a year later, I picked up Leviathan Wakes for a book club. And what I really loved about that book is that it was published before the pandemic, but
Yeah.
it brought up a question, which is if you know something horrible that's widespread happening, that could put everybody into a panic, how do you disseminate that information? And I felt like that was at least that question in the story. I'm not saying that's the only thing the story explored, but the way that question was brought forward, and the way that the two characters, Miller and Holden, the way they
Mhm.
went back and forth between that question and were on different sides of what was right and what was wrong. That philosophical argument I found so interesting. And what I also found interesting about it is that I had one idea of what the right answer was, and then I watched videos of people and they said, "Oh, the obvious answer was what Holden thought." And then I'd watch somebody else's video, "Oh, no, the obvious answer is what Miller thought." And I realized it's again just what we were talking about with Butler, where it's not obvious. Like you might think the author makes it obvious, but at least to the readers, it sort of was, but wasn't. So I loved the way that that was presented. I loved being put in that challenging situation, and I also think that the Mars belt way that that society was constructed was interesting. It seemed a little
Yeah.
more interesting to me in the book than it was in the show. But yeah, I felt satisfied with that first book, and for some reason, I never felt like I needed to continue, but I actually got a fair amount of satisfaction from reading that book.
Yeah, I actually, similarly to you, I did not finish the series. I read the first three books, and then something came up, one thing, another. I read something else, and then it was just so long that I said, "Well, if I'm gonna go to book four, I need to go back," and I just haven't. So I'll probably go back and start reading from the beginning. But yeah, it's a good series, and I think what you touched on, Joanna, is also very true. I think, in my opinion, it's one of the best series that kind of gives a glimpse at a potential future, maybe 150, 200 years from now, with mining in the belt, and the moons of Mars, the two moons, that small, being colonized as well. I think it's a fascinating look at a very possible, sense, maybe the wars between, and the friction. Hopefully there isn't that, but I do think that would be an amazing future for us to have, and I think it presents it in a very possible way, so I this is kind of the way I look at science fiction books. It is akin to reading history, book historical fiction like Cornwell, or you're reading about Vikings, or maybe the Sharp series, which was amazing. I still read it years ago, Napoleonic Wars. Um, and it puts you into the past like this, if when it's done well, and I believe it just propels you into a possible future, one of many that we may have, who knows, but a possible future, and that is so much fun, I think.
Yeah, I love that, and I always wonder about that because I feel like I'm not as well read in science fiction as you 2 are, but I feel like I've read a fair amount of science fiction books that talk about colonizing on other planets, and it
Yeah.
does make me wonder, is that gonna be in our future? Are we gonna be colonizing other planets? Yeah, and so, like, and, also, I'll quickly read this in relation to the Expanse series and show and series, sorry. They tweak some stuff to make it more TV friendly. In the book, it goes out of its way to say the ships are nowhere near each other. In the show, they barrel past each other for excitement. Interesting. I didn't realize that. So, Yeah. Good afternoon, fantasy thinker. And then Tom Warren says, funny enough, Leviathan Wakes may be my least favorite of the Expanse
No
books.
way.
Well, then maybe I should continue, Tom. I
Yeah, I
feel
think
that.
Tom
Yeah.
loves book 7 or 8, if I remember correctly. So I'm
Yeah.
still a long way from getting to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I might have to check it
Well,
out again.
we're all peas in a pod here, you guys, because I also have to take away my sci-fi card. I have also not finished the series. I have only done book 1, Joanna. So
What?
we're together
All right.
on that.
But
I am
Joanna,
so
did you see how Whitney was so quiet? She was sitting on this news.
I'm surprised because honestly, one of my questions for you today, Whitney, was going to be, what sci-fi book have you not read? Because I just watched it.
That may be the only
Oh
one.
my
No.
goodness. Like seriously, I was watching your political sci-fi video that you just put out, which was excellent. And then you've had some other videos like the Fermi paradox video where all these like huge list videos of just tons and tons of sci-fi books. And I'm like, wow, she has read everything under the sun when it comes to sci-fi or everything under the galaxy. I don't know. So I guess I was going to ask that, like, what sci-fi book have you not read? Or maybe I should say, what sci-fi giant, aside from the Expanse series, like, is there a sci-fi giant?
There are so many. There are so many. You know, I get tons of comments on my channel all the time about how dare I include a list without such and so book or such and so author or whatever. You know, I have only ever read one book of the Culture series, and that seems to be a big deal. I'm really trying to get further into that. That's a goal for next year.
Culture is awesome.
Bart actually inspired me, and Joanna, she helped too. I think I'm going to give Dark Tower series a try next year.
I hope you like it. I'm nervous, but I hope you like it.
That's one series that I'm loving. I should be finished with it, but I just been too busy to finish book 7, The Dark Tower. But it's amazing. I think it's well worth
to hear if it's worth it for me to start, Bart. I'm waiting for you.
Well, I recommended it. I recommended it to Jonathan from Words in Time, and I was so nervous about that recommendation, and he loved it. Yes, I was. I think I don't know. I can't tell you the dopamine hit I got when I heard that he loved it.
Oh, so, I watched you guys did a video together ranking the books, right? I remember that was a fun video.
I didn't expect him to love it like that. Like he shocked me.
It's a fantastic series, but it is one that's a little difficult to recommend because there's just so much to it. Each book is completely different, unique structure to each one. It's not for every reader, but yeah, it's amazing. Beltube knows. He knows what's up.
Well, you know, it's interesting to hear you describe it like that. And granted, these are not the comparable books, but written in different kinds of ways. That sounds very similar to one of Jonathan's other favorites and also mine, and that's the Hyperion Cantos, because each of those books are structurally very different.
Yeah.
And they're also not for everyone, but they're so fantastic and multi-layered if you are one of those people who they do appeal to. So I don't know if that's a similar
it's a good analogy. I think it's a good analogy. I only read the first 2 Hyperion books, so that's a little bit of on my list of shame that I haven't finished. I will, of course.
I've only read the first Hyperion book, but when we had that discussion with Jonathan, that was Josh from Red Fairy Books, and I had that discussion with Words in Time about the Dark Tower series, he brought up a really good point, which is there are some interesting parallels between the Dark Tower series by Stephen King and Hyperion. And I can see that even on book 1, like one, without giving away, I hope this isn't giving it. I don't think this is giving anything away. Like Wizard of Oz kind of stuff. And there's also just tons of like allusions to stuff. Both authors love to tip their hat to like every author that's been an influence to them. Like they love it. And then also the excellent character work and the way the characters come together and give you their backstories. And I feel like there are some really interesting parallels between those 2 series.
Yeah, knowing that you love Hyperion, I think you're gonna love Dark Tower as well. But it does have a different feel to it, and it's not straight science fiction. I mean, some people may argue it's not science fiction at all. I think it is because it's got, to me, many elements that I see as science fiction or choose to look at them through that lens. but you could look at it completely different too. I think it's probably more fantasy than SF in the end, but I think you'll enjoy, because there are many SF allusions or moments, or ways to look at it, as you know. So yeah, I think I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts when you finish the series.
I agree with that too. I mean, it has a lot of technology is a huge theme in the Dark Tower
Yeah.
series, but it does, I would say, lean a little more fantasy, but it's very genre bending.
Oh yeah.
Mixes pretty much everything in the kitchen sink, so to speak.
Well, you may not know this despite my channel, but I initially started as a fantasy reader, and I do still read fantasy every now and then. I just don't talk about it because people want to hear my sci-fi recommendations. So,
Oh, well, tell us about that, because,
know that.
and before you do, really quickly, I'll shout out Beltu, because I haven't watched your video yet, Beltu, but I'm going to watch it. He did a video on weird books, and he said that he included the Dark Tower and Hyperion today. So
That makes
kind of
sense.
perfect.
That
Yeah,
fits.
makes perfect sense.
I'm gonna
But
check it
yes,
out as well.
it does make sense together. I don't know. I'm gonna have to check it out now. It's almost required now.
Yeah.
There's not much, not too many stories weirder than the Priest Tale in Hyperion, for example, which I thought was incredible when I read it the first time.
Yes, love that. That was my favorite part of the whole book. Yeah.
But a
Yes.
little weird also.
Oh yeah, a lot. I like weird, and actually, it's a selling point for me with Hyperion. Even though I've only read book 1 so far, to me, it's actually a little bit of a selling point if I learn that there's a series, and that every book doesn't take the same exact cookie cutter structural approach. I've learned that when it comes to my taste, I kind of like authors to play with structure a little bit as they go on. So that's a plus for me personally. But I am really curious, Whitney. So you said that you started with sci-fi. I mean, started with fantasy. Can you tell us about what fantasy that you started with and how that journey transformed to sci-fi? And I would love to hear the same from you, Bart, like where the origins of your reading journey started and how you got into sci-fi.
Well, darn it, that takes away one of my questions. I was gonna ask how, like, why sci-fi and how you got into sci-fi, especially because both of you guys, one of the things that I like about both of your channels is that you don't really stick to genre definitions, and I really appreciate that. Like, is Urshiguro or Stephen King sci-fi or not, doesn't really matter if you enjoy the book. So I really like those things. I like being a little bit flexible. Oops. I like being a little bit flexible with a lot of these genre definitions and that kind of stuff. So I'm going to say that that's one of my questions, and I'm going to let Bart answer that first since I answered first last time.
Okay. Bart, yeah, go ahead. Bart,
Sorry,
tell us about your journey.
Got a little cold in here.
And I would be curious about this, Bart, because I love that you and I, like I said, you and I are kind of like bookish kindred spirits, and that we love like Yoshiguro and several other authors. I think you were also reading Le Guin recently, and
yeah, I read The Dispossessed. Le Guin is awesome. She's one of my favorite science fiction authors because of her approach to science fiction, which is different. It is unique, more philosophical. So The Lake of Heaven, for example, I enjoyed a lot. Left Hand of Darkness, of course, is another one. That's great. By the way, can you see me?
We could see you just fine.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'll just quickly say that I finished The Dispossessed was the first book I finished this year. And I just recently did a reread via audio because there were so many details I wanted to remind myself about. And I also just read The Word for World is Forest. And I might be picking up The Lathe of Heaven this month if time allows. Anyway, just wanted to do a little Le Guin aside, but we could talk more about her later. Tell us about your journey though, Bart. Like how did you end up where you ended up with sci-fi, and also having a book channel that did start out more sci-fi, and it sounds like you've kind of danced around some other genres as well.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess we're going back a little bit. I've always read books since I was a kid. I grew up in Warsaw in Poland. So one thing about reading that was also amazing for me growing up as a kid, and this was in the 80s. it allowed me to kind of expand my mind and travel to places where I didn't think I could at the time, living, behind the Iron Curtain. We were somewhat limited at that time still. So I loved reading travel books, adventures in, Australia and Africa. And, since then I've been able to, visit a lot of these places, like climb Mount Kilimanjaro, and it's been awesome. But as a kid, books were an escape for me. So I read all kinds of things. And I discovered science fiction probably really when I came to US with Arthur C. Clarke, books like Rendezvous with Rama. That's probably the first proper science fiction, other than Stanisław Lem, the Polish author of Solaris. I know you've read Solaris, Joanna.
Yes. Oh, yes. So you read that in the original language then?
I read it in the original language. Yep, I've read most of the books written by Lem. I read in Polish. I maybe read one or two in English just to see the translation. I think I read The Return from the Stars in English.
How was the translation? Was it good?
Yes.
Yeah, it was good. Some books that were translated, some of Lem's books are difficult to translate because of the fact that he uses unique language. And Lem really has many different types of books. Some of them like Solaris are kind of a straight linear story. Others, there's a ton of play on words where he's inventing things, words, like in Star Diaries or the Siberia. So those are particularly difficult to translate. And thankfully, we're getting better translations now from Lem. He is being read in English, but years ago, translations into English were not from the original Polish, but from the French or the German.
Yes. Yes.
So that was really weird, to have that separation from the original. But now there's some good translations, and I think they're fine. I think they're really good. There was So Lem is awesome, and I was reading him just because he's someone that is very famous in Poland as an author of but other than that, it was maybe in the early 90s when I started to read in English that I started to discover science fiction, and I think it connected with with my interest in space in general at that time, also in cosmos, in the universe, and it's been an awesome ride. But I still enjoy reading literary works. I had there was a major time where I loved crime noir, like Scandinavian mysteries, like Joe Nesbo. I enjoyed those. So yeah, I've been reading pretty much anything and everything. Like I said, historical fiction. With Cornwell, with his incredible battle scenes.
Yes.
I love Cornwell's descriptions of places and battles specifically. I think he's excellent at that. Like Ken Follett, also Pillars of the Earth, books like that. So I enjoy all kinds of books. And while my channel has a little bit of leans towards science fiction, I don't want to, just because I have this channel, to pigeonhole myself into having to read nothing but SF. So maybe lately I've been, and I think, Joanna, you've been an influence in that, because I really love listening to your reviews. And you got me to read some of those books. I don't think we're definitely kindred spirits, but it's not just because, universe aligned. I think some of the books, like Stoner, for example, I think I read because of you. And I loved it. It's one of my all-time favorite books. So that's, I don't know, I'm kind of all over the place. My computer also died, so I can't see you. So this is a little weird. But as long as you can hear me and see me, then we're all good.
We can hear you and see you just fine.
I'm having some screen issues, and so I'll show you my screen right now. Looks like this.
Oh no.
Yeah. So I'm thrown off a little bit because of that.
Pattern there.
Yeah, I'd have to close it up. I've had some issues with the monitor.
I was just gonna say though, so as far as what you were saying though about Solaris or Stanislaw Lem, I had a hard time because I knew I wanted to read Solaris, which I read earlier this year, but I found that the one that's most widely available, it's the orange and white copy that those of you can find maybe in a Barnes and Noble, that is twice translated. So it was translated to French and then to English. But I did manage to find a translation that is translated directly from Polish to English, and it was only available via ebook. And there's an audiobook that's fairly new audiobook that's also the same translation. And I loved it. I loved it
Oh,
so much, and I probably should read more Lem as a result of that. But I did love hearing your journey, Bart, with all these different genres, and I'm so happy that you loved stoner. I know that's gotta be so outside the box compared to some of these other, books that you've read, and it just amazes me because I obviously, I'm a huge, stoner fan here, but it always surprises me how many people resonate with that book because
there is
just
something
seeing
magical about that book. I don't really know still what it is, but yeah, it was a revelation for me. I really connected with the protagonist. He's not the perfect man. He makes mistakes. In my opinion, I was frustrated with him to no ends at some points, especially around his daughter. There's so many things that, but it felt true. His life experience just rung resonated so much. So I think that's what I loved about it. And the writing is also really good, straightforward, but well written. So I want to read. I know Williams didn't write a lot of books. There's a couple more that I meant to get to. I haven't read them yet, but I will.
absolutely. And also, I'll go ahead and read you Jeroen's comment in the chat
Okay.
since I know you can't see the
I,
screen, but
I don't see anything.
he says here that Lem is so great. I love
Oh,
the Cybraid and
Siberia.
Siberia.
Siberia. Okay, sorry. And the Futurological Congress.
Yes, the Futurological Congress is insane. It's a crazy, crazy book. Siberia is a fantastic collection of short stories about two robots, constructors, who try to outdo one another. They're really friendly. They're friends, but they also get into skirmishes from time to time, and it's really it's ingenious. It's really fascinating. In one of the stories, one of the constructor robots, for example, invents a machine that can create anything you could imagine, as long as that thing starts with the letter N. So there you can see also how difficult it might be to translate from Polish to English. But the craziness kind of ensues when one of the robots, the other one, tells the machine to create nothing. So yeah, some bad things happen at that point. But
Wow.
it's a fantastic, fantastic collection of short stories, and a completely different tone, because it's really lighthearted also and fun. Completely different tone from like a book like Solaris or Return from the Stars or The Invincible, which is a great book as well. The famous video game was made from the book Invincible. So there's a lot.
Oh, that's so cool to learn about.
Well,
So,
Bart, I have a request. I
Yeah.
would love for you to make a Stanislaw Lem recommendation. Like
yes.
just in general, because I got to tell you, I, as a sci-fi reader, I have read Solaris,
Uh-huh.
and I think I got a poor translation of it because I read it and I was like, really, this? How can so many people like this? I was so confused. I thought it was so poorly done. And I'm like, I must be extra crazy because I had such a poor time with it. And talking to a bunch of my friends, especially Joanna, as she has gone through and read this book, and she's just over the moon about how great it was. And she definitely had a different translation than I did. I got a like really old translation, and I mean, I think the cover was torn from like a secondhand shop. Like it was really super old. And so I'm thinking that I want to give him another chance, but I got to be honest, I don't want to do Solaris again.
Yeah.
I would like to do something else and maybe hear about how to tell, what's a good translation, or like here's some of your recommendations on what to read next and all the different books. You should make that video. I would totally watch that.
Okay, well, I'll do it. That's no problem. That's pretty easy. But yeah, I would maybe recommend a different tone, because Lem has books that feel different. They're not all the same. Like some authors, you'll read one book and you've read them all. As far as how they read, the story may be different, but they're similarly written. He has a range of voices, and maybe Star Diaries would be a good one to pick up because it's a completely different tone, and it's one, if you like look it up on Goodreads to read a little bit about it. I think it's quite popular as well. I mean, you never know if you're going to resonate with an author. It's such a personal experience with book reading, obviously. But Star Diaries, I think, has a completely different tone. But I think it's also fantastic adventures, fantastic stories there. But it's different than Solaris or like Return from the Stars, or His Master's Voice is another one that's more dry. I don't know. I love Solaris because of the different aspects. I've been thinking a lot about consciousness, and that thing just blew my mind to think about a planet that is one consciousness, unknowable, totally different consciousness than what we can think of and understand. And also because that I love the fact that that book is able to create this feeling of dread, a little bit of horror in it. Yeah, I don't know. I love Solaris is one of my favorite books, but I could see not everybody liking it for sure.
Yeah, I would just echo everything you just said about why I love Solaris. I've never read a book that did a better job as far as, like, giving you a non-anthropomorphized, even though that's
Yeah,
impossible to do. It's impossible to do that, but as well as possible, non-anthropomorphized version of consciousness, and also, like you said, that feeling of dread that creeps up through the tone of the book, and I also just found the ending
yeah.
poignant and
Oh,
melancholy. It to
Have you
me,
guys read Blindsight? I have to ask.
I want to,
fantastic.
but I also want to read this comment because I know Bart can't see the chat.
Thank
And
you.
so Dale Jones says here, though, that I'm sorry to say I didn't enjoy Solaris either, going along with Whitney. So it's certainly not a book for everyone, like Bart
Yeah,
said. I think part of the thing, there are a couple of scenes that I do think are a little that didn't age well or didn't make sense to me personally, and then there are some chapters that are kind of info dumpy in
oh
the
yeah,
way
fair
that
enough.
they're
Yeah.
presented. So I could see that turning off some readers, I should just add, but for me, the strengths outweighed those. But go ahead, Blind Sight, I have not read. Have you read it, Bart? I'm sorry.
I yes, of course. Like yeah, but Blindside is one that I read. I need to reread it because I struggled with it a little bit. I liked it a lot. It kind of touches on some similar themes as Solaris, I think, around consciousness, or perhaps whether consciousness is even necessary, for intelligence and survival and species development. It's technological and otherwise. So it's a fascinating story. There's some weird stuff in it. I mean, no
It's
spoilers, but there's like a vampire. So
Mhm.
it's but it is I think it's a book that I need to reread. I think it's fascinating as well.
Yeah, I just brought it up because the way that you described it again, it reminded me of Blindsight because it was at depth a discussion of consciousness that blew my mind, that
Yeah,
ended very melancholic. That was all of the ways that you guys described what you liked about Solaris is present in a different way, of course, in Blindsight. And you're not alone, Bart. I think that it's a very dense book. It's not a fun book to get
no,
through, but when you finish it and when you
yeah,
feel like you grasp the ending, especially, I feel like it's definitely a book that sparks a lot of interesting conversation. But I had to like reread it immediately and like take a lot of notes and try to figure it out. So
yeah, yeah. That's interesting. It's definitely a book that stays with you. It's a book that I think about more often than maybe books that I enjoy reading more. But
right.
even though I like this one less, I think about it more. So it's one of those books for me, and because of that, I think going back to it will be a good experience, and I'll get more out of the reread because it is pretty dense. It approaches the question of consciousness from a different point, I think, than Solaris. I think it overtly talks a little bit about it, a little bit more. Solaris is maybe more just philosophical, and but yeah, fantastic book, Peter
I
Watts.
watched I watched an excellent, lecture of Peter Watts on YouTube,
Okay.
and that my friend Jimmy from the Fantasy Network, recommended to me, and he was saying in that particular discussion that I guess his book is even being taught in certain science classes.
Really?
There were certain science professors that were passing around that book and having their students read it to discuss it. I don't remember the details about that, but I remember he said something along those lines.
I wonder how it would or why it was in a science class that it was
I hope
I
I'm not misquoting him, but I thought he said that.
psychology, because there's so many different, even the humans, the people on the I don't want to any spoilers, but each one is unique. There's some people have their mind severed, so there's all these different types of consciousness also with the crew of the ship, which if you read the book, Joanna, you'll find, I think, interesting as well, in addition to the other consciousness, let's say. I don't know, always
Yeah.
afraid to spoil the book
What
for someone.
Yeah, I just know consciousness is something that we are still trying to understand, and it's something that he brought up the big, huge, conference that happened in 2012 when scientists had a breakthrough in how, or maybe they came to a different understanding of consciousness, and that was when they actually agreed that animals were conscious.
Oh
I
yeah.
know, or sentient or something. I don't know. Like there was a different understanding of animals being conscious. I know that sounds weird to us now. I don't It was just an interesting discussion, but I think the whole question about consciousness is one that's been ongoing for a while. And I don't know that we have come to any sort of definite understanding of it even at this point.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating conversation, and I know, Joanna, you and I, we talked or chatted previously a little bit about the book that Determined, and that also the free will and consciousness,
Oh,
and
yeah.
whether it exists or not. There's so much to know about our mind, and so little, I think, we've tapped into, that this conversation will continue, and I think it's very interesting for
Yeah,
sure.
very interesting. But yeah, so Blind Sight, that's high on your recommendation list, Whitney?
Well, just because it sounded similar to how you guys were describing what you liked about Solaris. So,
Okay, cool. And says, we got a comment here. Peter Watts has a great short collection called Beyond the Rift. I have heard of that before.
Oh yeah,
Monty.
I've
Okay.
heard about it as well.
mhm.
Yeah. Um, all right. So, Whitney, you're going to tell us about your journey now.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, I'm gonna try to be brief. I do have, I'm hoping, soon, an upcoming video called "The Books That Made Me," kind of going deep dive into my reading journey. But to kind of summarize, really started to read late, which is probably surprising. Um, I don't know. I was definitely late in my elementary school classes to learn how to read, but
That is surprising, by the way, but go
Yeah.
ahead.
um, I think because of that, I took a little bit more of a conscious effort maybe to learn how to read and understand things better and faster, and learned how to annotate, and I don't know, like really really young. I started in mysteries and really started learning to love to read when I found escapism in reading, when I found books that, like, you forget that you're sitting there reading words on a page and you're in the story.
I'll never forget that feeling the first time when you first discover that's possible. There's nothing like that, especially as a kid, right?
Not
Yeah.
even watching movies. There's your answer
No.
why I read. That feeling right there.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes,
If I can
absolutely.
jump in, I know, Whitney, you'll continue in a second, but I'll forget to say this. I watched some time ago, Joanna, your video when you were describing when you were a little girl, how much these books affected you, and where you had to like kind of wake yourself up almost after reading the book and say, no, this is just a book, these are words, now I'm here, because you were so immersed, right? I thought that was so beautiful the way you described that. Because it also took me back to when I was a kid. I used to hide under covers like with a light to read a book when I was a kid so my parents wouldn't see it. And yeah, so you brought back some memories, so thank you.
Oh, thank you. I know what video you're talking about. That's my video on do you visualize what you read? And
Oh, okay.
it was incredible because I had no idea how many people out there don't visualize what they read. Not that you have to. You don't have to visualize what you read in order to enjoy a book or be immersed. But anyway, yeah, I that was such an interesting discussion. Thank you.
Yeah,
So
I
yes,
love that.
Whitney, I'm so sorry.
No,
Go
Yes.
don't worry
continue
about it.
on.
This is
Yeah.
supposed to be a discussion.
And
So
it's true. It is. It's a conversation. It's just a fun conversation. Yeah.
Well, and I wanted to add that I actually really liked that video too, because I had never really thought about, do I actually visualize what I read or not? That's not something that I had really thought about a whole lot before we started talking about that video. So that was a fun video. Very much, guys, go check that out.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
It's an older video, but I was really proud of it. Not so much just because of I love topics like that, but it was just so fascinating to read the comment section because half the comments, I kid you not, it felt like I need to go back and do a count. So I might be skewing this in my head, but it seemed like half the comments on that video were people saying, I didn't realize people didn't visualize what they read. And the other half of comments were like, people visualize what they read? Like,
Yeah.
and it felt so, even down the middle, and I've realized over the years that, yes, my earliest experiences of reading were very visually immersive. Were very much, I am in a movie. I'm in the movie versus just watching it, like you said, Whitney. At the same time, I feel like my reading experiences, especially exploring other genres over the years, there are some books I think that are inviting you to think a little bit more in a way that is using a different part of your brain rather than just your visual cortex. So I think that it makes sense that different books would elicit different experiences or to different degrees when it comes to that.
And you know what? If I may, I thinking about that question. I think I'm somewhere in between. I think I visualize when I read, but I have to make a bit of an effort almost. It isn't easy, or maybe some books just spark it. I don't know, but it's not always that I read and have images come up organically. I have to work on it, I feel a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, I do think that the discussion is interesting because I also think, Bart, that part of that could be because of the type of book. You know,
Yeah.
some books are really character heavy. So you feel like, you know, with Dawn, you feel like you're in that character's shoes. Whereas some books, like, say, Blindsight, that's a really difficult book because it's philosophical. Probably Solaris as well, very philosophical, lots of high level concepts or things that we haven't ever experienced. So we wouldn't even know what that looks like. So I don't know. I think some of that might have to do with the kind of book. And also, I wonder if it has anything to do with whether or not you experience the book like audiobook versus physical reading versus Kindle versus, you know, however you consume your media as well.
I agree with that. By the way, Tom Orange here in the chat says, same Bart to to
Well,
you.
you know what? My screen is back. I
Oh,
like
it's
I moved this. It's back. So I
Oh.
thank you, Tom. Yes, I saw that comment. It just came back like a couple of minutes ago. So much easier. It was so weird to talk without seeing anybody.
Yeah.
But yes,
I
I'm back.
agree with that with Whitney though, and I know that there were a number of people in the comment section of that video who said that they sometimes will visualize settings, but they don't usually visualize what the character looks like. And
Mm,
I have a couple, well, what's interesting about that is I think a lot of times authors, even if they're writing in third person, they don't always give a lot of detailed description to what the character looks like. That's something I've
yeah.
noticed with a lot of authors. And I think that the idea is that even if it's in third person, you're still a lot of times invited to see the world through the character's perspective. So your eyes aren't really necessarily on what the character looks like, but more like the setting. The descriptions are usually more towards the setting, which is evolving in the story. That's my guess with that. That said, though, I did have a really eerie experience so many years ago when I read The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss and then The Wise Man's Fear, which is the second book in that King Killer Chronicles series. And that's in first person narration. And the weird thing about that was I got to the end of the second book and I had a dream that I met Gavoth, the main character. And I kid you not, he looked so detailed in my dream. Like I saw this vivid image of Gavoth. And I woke up and thought, what? I don't know how that happened. It was so strange. Anyway.
That's
Uh,
interesting.
yeah.
I like that the authors don't fill in those gaps because sometimes you can then either insert yourself into the story or your brain can fill in the details. And sometimes the less detailed the author becomes about the setting, the more that you can use your own imagination and your own preferences. And sometimes I think that's why the book is so much better than the movie.
Yes, I agree with that too. As somebody who likes to visualize what I read, I don't necessarily think that more is better when it comes to description because of what you said, Whitney. I
Yeah.
think that there needs to be some room for your imagination to fill in those blanks. So I'm with that. I like that answer a lot. I'll quickly read some of the chat since we have some good chat going here. Capricious Fox says, I find it really difficult to visualize. I rely on the author providing distinct descriptions, which is totally fair. And some Okie Dude, hello. Nice to see you. And Dale Jones says, I found that if I watch a movie before I read the book, that the actors in the movie are who I see when I read.
Yeah.
Yeah, that can definitely be a big influence.
That could be annoying, I think. I'm never happy about that.
I'm kind of mixed about it. Like, for example, I reread A Song of Ice and Fire a few years ago, and I kind of liked the cast of the show, honestly. I think they did a
They were
phenomenal
great.
job. So it worked for me. Hello, Sebastian. And then Glitter NB. And I'm sorry if I mispronounce anybody's names because I'm the worst at pronouncing words, but I visualize books while I read, but I always visualize things, especially characters, really differently than they are described. I do that sometimes, by the way. My brain just half makes it up on its own. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. Yeah. So anyhow, going back to Whitney again. So
Okay. Well, so making this quicker, I guess. I started with a little bit of mystery, a little bit of YA, moved into historical fiction. I think it's the fault of like school. You know, they always make you read things like Number of the Stars or World War II something, that kind of stuff. And then from there, I went into fantasy, and I feel like I was a huge fantasy reader for the majority of my junior high school. And believe it or not, I never started science fiction until college. I had one of my really good friends who liked a boy, and she wanted me to like intervene for her. And I got to know this guy. We were friends, and he handed me my very first science fiction book ever, which was Snow Crash by Neil Stevenson.
Okay.
And it just hit me at the right time, right perfect things. And I just loved that I could enjoy a story as well as learning something from it, as well as seeing how religion and corporations and things are different than I thought they were. And that was just such a big deal. And I just didn't look back since then. So.
And Snow Crash is not usually a book that you would think is good for beginners to science fiction. It is, it's not like Project Hail Mary, that it could be recommended to anyone, or, that type of book.
You jumped in the deep end.
I did.
Yeah,
I did.
But,
yeah. I don't know. It was just I got lucky, I guess. I don't know. I've been really having a great time with science fiction since then. And I think somehow as I get older, I guess I need the escapism a little less, and I'm looking for a little bit more of the stimulation, which is why I'm leaning a little bit more towards science fiction now. But I definitely still read plenty of fantasy. I just don't talk about it as much. So
What fantasy books have you enjoyed, by the way?
a lot. I have definitely read all of the two Patrick Rothfuss books that you were talking about earlier. I'm very much looking forward to the Brandon Sanderson 5th installment of The Way of Kings. So there's quite some big chunkers there.
You do. You read a lot of fantasy. It's so surprising. I'm all surprised by that. But yeah, Snow Crash. Wow. So I read that earlier this year, and I know, Whitney, my thoughts about that. I still hold to the idea that the first quarter of that book is one of the best beginnings of any book I've ever read. I was so blown away by how that book started. The rest of the book didn't. It just didn't. It didn't reach that peak anymore. Like it peaked, unfortunately for me after that. But yeah, it definitely has some really important ideas, I think. as you described. So that's interesting that was your entry point, cyberpunk, right? Is it cyberpunk or no, not cyberpunk?
I mean, it is a little bit. It
Is
is.
it cyberpunk? Yeah, it is
Yeah.
cyberpunk. That's right.
Yeah. I agree with you, man. I used to tell people that those first 7 pages were one of the best of all time. I thought it was really great at the time I read it. So
Yeah, I'll never forget it because my husband has a VR set. He has the newest one. I wanna say it's the MetaQuest 3, and I put it on and I forgot, like, I forgot that the book was about that, and it was so funny because I put it on, he was like, "Look at this virtual world." So I went into the virtual world. I was like, "Whoa," because it is wild. I don't know if you've ever used a VR before, but it is so crazy. You're really literally in a different world, and then you take it off and you're in your living room, and it's so strange. And then I went and picked up the book and started reading, and I I was just floored that this is the book that introduced the metaverse term and the idea of a VR world. It's just so fascinating. Yeah. Um, that's cool though that you're into both genres. I guess to answer the question, since you asked it as well, Whitney, right? To all three of us. I would go ahead and say for me, my interest in books started with YA horror books when I was 9 or 10 years old, and
Goosebumps.
then yeah, actually, it was before Goosebumps. I got I did get into Goosebumps, but I was a little bit aged out of it by the time those started coming out. That ages me so much. But I yeah, I was into Fear Street, which is the same author, R.L. Stine, but I loved his Fear Street saga. So I read I don't know how many books I read so many. My friend Gavin just read like 50 of his books and did a like 5-hour vlog of it. And I looked at the list at the beginning and I was like, "Oh my goodness, I've read most of that list." And I don't remember most of the storylines, but I remember the covers and the titles. And I certainly remember my journey with those books. And then another author called Lois Duncan, which most people probably, oh, I Know What You Did Last Summer, that movie, if you've heard of the movie. She's the one who wrote the book that movie is based on, as well as several other books. And then so I got into reading when I was in elementary school, middle school, and then when I was in high school, I got away from it for a little while, and then a friend lent me The Hobbit by J.R.R.
Mm.
Tolkien, and I loved The Hobbit. And I also read the beginning of Lord of the Rings around that time. I stopped at The Return of the King, and that's a whole other story. But I my first sci-fi book was around that time as well. It's a book I have on my shelf that nobody's heard of, would probably, except that I bring it up sometimes in videos, and it's called Summer of Love by Lisa Mason. And so it's sort of a time travel story. It's not really a time travel story. It takes place in 1967 in the summer of love, San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury, and it follows a young flower child who runs away from home to join the hippies. And then there's this man who comes from the far distant future who comes back in time, and he's trying to help save this girl because even though she seems to be one of thousands of people and doesn't seem very significant, just an ordinary girl, her life, the future of her life is going to have huge repercussions for mankind. And actually, it goes into weird directions at the end, but I really liked it. I loved it actually. Loved the book. And it was the first adult sci-fi book I think I've read. And that first sci-fi book I read is Frankenstein. I read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, loved that, of course.
The
And then
original.
yeah, the I think it yeah, I know there are 2 versions. I wanna say it was the original, but I
Well, I
honestly
also meant just the original science fiction book. Like
oh, the
that's
original science fiction
there
book.
were some
Yes.
people, but most people feel that's the modern science fiction genre's beginning.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's such a powerful book, and I do think it owes its credit to sci-fi more than horror. Because I know some people think of Frankenstein as horror because of media. But after that, I didn't really read a lot of sci-fi. I went more into the fantasy route, and then I read Dune, I wanna
Mm.
say about 12 years ago. And I always wanted to read Dune, but I was intimidated by it, and I loved Dune. I read Dune, and I got to the end, and I closed the book, and I remember thinking, is this the best book I've ever read? Like, I
Mhm,
actually had that thought. And
mhm,
the only reason I held back from fully committing to feeling like it's the best book I ever read is that I didn't feel I didn't feel totally satisfied with the ending. Something about the ending didn't feel 100% complete for me. Even though I know that Frank Herbert wrote it as a standalone, I I still didn't feel totally complete about it, but then, my significant other at the time, who was a huge Dune fan, said, "Don't read the sequels, don't read them. 'Em, they're horrible, just stop there." So I did go on to some other sci-fi from there. I went into 2001: Space Odyssey, I read Starship Troopers and Stranger in a Strange Land and Ender's Game. So I read a few other sci-fi books, and for whatever reason, I went back to fantasy again, and now I'm trying to make up for some lost time. I'm not very well read when it comes to sci-fi, but every time I read a sci-fi book, I love it. I always find I resonate with the themes. I love time travel. I've noticed that's something that I tend to love. Depends, of course. And and yeah, I think there's just something very special about the genre that gets me to think about, societal themes. I think societal themes and philosophical themes are what I'd gravitate towards when it comes to sci-fi. But yeah, it's such a great varied genre for sure.
It's a great. I would say one thing, a couple of things actually. Number one, I think Dune is the perfect gateway drug from for someone who loves fantasy to get to science fiction.
Yeah.
mhm,
It's a little bit of fantasy in it as well. Obviously, a science fiction book, but I think it's an excellent transition from one to the other. I think that there isn't a more perfect book to give to someone who enjoys fantasy already, because it has a little bit of that grand setting and houses and religion and all those themes, but just set in a, I don't know, 30,000 years into the future. Uh, so yeah, fascinating. And also, I would say that I'm just curious when I think about fantasy. And I haven't read as much as the two of you have in the genre. I love The Hobbit more so than Lord of the Rings, for example.
Mm.
I read Stormlight Archive, the first two books. I'm going to continue because I enjoyed them quite a bit. I've read some other stuff in fantasy as well, but it seems like when I read fantasy, it feels like the stories are different, the setting is different, but it kind of feels like it's derivative in some ways. It feels like it's got this kind of, I don't know, like this self-serious tone to it always. And I don't know. I guess what I'm trying to say, not to not to say anything bad about fantasy. What I love about science fiction is the fact that there's so many different types of books in the science fiction genre. Because you mentioned time travel, those books are like 1122,
Oh,
63
I love that
steampunk.
book.
That
Yes.
has What does that have to do with a story like Dune or a story like 2001: A Space Odyssey? Completely different story. And then we have aliens. We have a book like Solaris, which is completely different. So I think, and then of course we have a whole sub genre of dystopian novels that are also science fiction. A future world that has fallen, perhaps. Um, Post-apocalyptic, a different twist on it, right? Like The Road. I mean, science fiction is so broad. That's kind of what I love about it. Like one of my all-time favorite quotes, is a quote from Arthur C. Clarke. How does the quote go? It's on my channel. I think he says, either we are alone in the universe, um, or we are not, and both are equally terrifying. That part about both. There's just so much to probe and to discover in science fiction. So yeah, but I do need to read more fantasy because I shouldn't talk about it because I just haven't read enough, probably.
I So
But
yeah, I would say just like science fiction, fantasy has a lot of subgenres. There are a lot of different types of fantasy. There's fantasy that's more like I I I don't want to give genre fiction a bad name or a bad rap because I think genre fiction has a place. And I think of genre fiction almost like a good pop song. Like people think pop song, oh, if they're serious musicians and classically trained, oh, anybody could do that. Ah, ha, ha, ha. No, you can't. It's an art to do a good pop song. I think it's an art to do good genre fiction. So I'm not demeaning it by any means by saying that. But you do have like you do have you have sci-fi and fantasy that's more like maybe on the pulp side of things, like more escapist, more, just having fun with a story. Whereas you also have fantasy that goes really deep and in depth and explores the human condition.
Oh yeah.
Last and Book of the Fallen is one of my favorite series. It's not an easy recommend either, but I would say that there is the theme of capitalism that came up in that series. That's one of the many themes. There's several themes in that series, but I know that when it explored capitalism specifically, that was something that made me think about our own world and made me think about my part in our world a little bit more deeply. So there's a range when it comes to fantasy as well. When it comes to some of these scarier questions, or like right now, I'm reading the Second Apocalypse series by R. Scott Baker, which begins with the Prince of Nothing trilogy and the darkness that comes before. And that series, even though it takes place in what feels like a medieval setting past, it still brings up questions about the human condition and what we would do in certain situations, and about zealotry, about our relationship with uncertainty, and also like you were talking about Sapolsky and the questions of free will.
Yeah.
That comes up a lot in that series as well. And I think the way Baker tackles those themes or questions, he does so in a very sophisticated way. So I feel like there are certain humanitarian themes that come up in fantasy. It's just a different setting, a different flavor. And at the same time, there's a lot of bleed over, right? There's a lot of sci fantasy out there,
Yeah, there is
or there's a lot of bleed over. So yeah, it's interesting, but I do agree there is obviously some distinction between the two genres, and I would say the two genres are similar in that you have that spectrum. You have the escapist, more fun, lighthearted, read for a couple of days and just have a good time. Put the book down, not think about it too much, and then you have other books where it's like you can't stop thinking about it after you finish it. It made me feel a little haunted and unsettled by what it's saying about you and life and the human condition.
Yeah, I just felt that what you talked about is very interesting, and I'm sure there's some amazing fantasy books that when I read them, I'm gonna be blown away and fall in love with them because of the writing, the story, and that human condition. But the human condition is not unique to fantasy. That could be done in any genre. I'm talking
True.
about science fiction having these things that are unique to it, as opposed to just this was some world somewhere, a map in the front of the book, and we're gonna talk about them. Yeah, those things can be talked about, in literary fiction, in science fiction, like the dispossessed, right? The two worlds. It could be done in it, but then I just think science fiction, to me, has some unique opportunities, and it just seems broader. I don't know,
Yeah.
because of the different types of science fiction, like cyberpunk, going inside a computer and uploading our minds. That those ideas, exploring that, for example, feels completely different. And I think science fiction has the ability to really uniquely challenge the reader. Like the Diaspora, for example, I read, and I have no clue what I Jonathan, we talked about him earlier from Word in Time, loves that book. I have no clue what I read, but it was challenging, it was interesting, very much science heavy. Went over my head, but I think, I don't know, that's kind of the way I view it. I'm always fascinated how every single book I pick up in science fiction feels a little bit different than the previous one. Or the good ones anyway. I'm thinking about, because there's of course uh, some books that are just kind of fun reads that don't challenge you, or don't push the boundaries as much. So
Yeah. I certainly love books that challenge me as a reader. Yeah, that's a really interesting conversation point that's worth talking about or considering. I was going to bring up a comment here really quickly. Oh yes, I read Ubik this year,
oh
so
yeah,
I
you
loved, which I loved, and I do need to read more from Philip K. Dick. Hello, Vera. And here we have Dale says, I knew diaspora was going to come up. I struggled with it so much with it.
it's a book that I read, I can say, but I cannot say that I that I got much out of it, but it was fascinating at the same time. And I see Vera is asking where I'm from. I'm from the same place you are, Vera. We're both from Poland. I'm from Warsaw.
That's true. I didn't even think about that for whatever reason. Interesting. So yeah, what are your thoughts about this topic though, Whitney? How would you
Yes.
weigh in about the difference between science fiction and fantasy?
Well, I don't know. I'm not trying to start any fights. I don't know.
Sci-fi.
You're a bad
Bart's
influence,
like
Bart. You're a bad influence.
starting
So
a war here.
I mean, I think I do think that fantasy is very varied. I will say, as somebody who has read quite a lot, I mean, you have young adult fantasy, which is very different from adult fantasy. You have high fantasy, which is very different than, say, zombie fantasy or romantasy or the vampire fiction that you can have. I mean, Anne Rice is technically considered fantasy, which is way different from something like Patrick Rothfuss, right?
Yeah.
So I think that there's quite a lot of variety there. That said, I also think that the definitions between them are like very gray. For example, a lot of what we consider to be true old-fashioned from the 1960s, 1970s science fiction, even if you go back into the 1940s, a lot of those pulpy science fiction vintage stories were really about somebody in space who has some kind of psychic power. And they really thought that that was a possibility for us.
Oh yeah, there's a ton about psychic PS2.
Right. And since that didn't end up happening, it kind of lands in the magical powers side of things. So
Yeah.
is it science fiction or is it fantasy? Nobody knows, right? And I
So
think
true.
it's kind of fun to have those discussions and to see, like, you know, if an author bites the bullet, if you will, and tries to project what happens and it turns out not to be, failed science fiction books eventually become fantasy, right? If you look at it like that.
Interesting. That's
Great
an
point.
interesting way to put it. I so yeah, I feel like it really does depend on the book. And like I think like Whitney says, I think that the genre of fantasy is so vast. A lot of times we see certain types of fantasy series being promoted, but I would say especially I think this kind of relates a little bit to a wonderful discussion I had with my friend Tori earlier this year on epic fantasy. We were talking about the difference between epic fantasy and maybe just ordinary fantasy. And there's a lot of different fantasy that does a lot of different things. But something we talked about with epic fantasy in particular, and something that's really strong in that genre as far as like the world building and what its approach to theme is, it can tend to be a little bit more than just the personal. So whereas if you read a fantasy story that's very personal, maybe a character is going through betrayal or questioning loyalty. Those are very common themes, or honor in fantasy. Whereas if you're looking at things from an epic standpoint, you're looking at politics, you're looking at environmental issues that come up in fantasy, you're looking at patriarchy, you're looking at colonization. So those are hard, difficult, challenging aspects of the world, the real world, that can be brought into a fantastical setting and can be approached in fantasy, and that a lot of fantasy authors explore. And so in that way, I think explore important themes that are resonant to what we're going through right now. Whereas I think in science fiction, we are dealing a little bit more with specific technology. Um, you mentioned that there is the time travel aspect. There are certain, obviously, societal questions that come up in science fiction as well. And sometimes I think some of those questions specifically are the technology questions that's what always comes to my mind. Like as we started this whole chat with ChatGPT, if any of you are coming late to this discussion, I highly recommend you watch the beginning to see Bart's answer to the question. It kind of comes down to that question though, but like what Whitney was saying, there is like a blurry like line there, and I sometimes people have a hard time distinguishing between the difference between science fiction and fantasy. I saw on Whitney on one of your recent videos that you were talking about villains. Oh, your villain video, which was so fun. I loved it. And you were talking about Darth Vader in one, and I saw somebody comment on your video. They said, Star Wars is fantasy.
Yeah.
And some people consider it fantasy, some people consider it science fiction. It's one of those blurry lined stories. I would, yeah,
Well, I kind of hate, like we talked about earlier, I kind of hate trying to define the genre too hard. It's like,
yeah,
you know, it's not about gatekeeping on what is and isn't, it's, did you like it? Do you
Yeah,
think
of
it's
course.
sci-fi? Do you think it's fantasy? Whichever you feel like is probably fine, because regardless of where they put it on the shelf, if you had a great reading experience, or if it made you think, or if it brought good conversation, or if you just simply enjoyed it, that's okay. So I guess I am kind of somebody who's on the line of, I'm trying to, if I make a video about a list, I want to define for you the rules that I laid out for my list. But other than that, like, I'm not somebody who's going to say whether something is or isn't fantasy, science fiction, or sci-fantasy. I don't know.
I don't, yeah, lines get so blurry for me too. And I think that's okay. I think that's actually just the nature of genre, by the way. I think it's hard to find any book that follows a strict genre criteria. Usually there's going to be bleed over with anything. So, yeah, I agree that those lines need to be a bit soft. Um,
Well, I
but
just need to read more fantasy, I guess. But yes, there's I mean, horror bleeds into these books and literary fiction. It's all amazing, and uh, I'm just happy that reading is such a big part of my life, and also for the fact that the booktube community exists, because this is so much fun, talking to you and having this community that has added such a great aspect. And I don't think it does get talked about, but I don't think it's talked about enough how amazing and positive this community is, because of our mutual love of reading. I think this has been such a great discovery for me personally. So yeah, I enjoyed, even though I have somewhat limited time to work on some of the videos that I do. It's always such a pleasure to read the comments and to connect with people and to shoot videos like this. This is awesome. So
yeah,
Agree. Thank you, Joanna.
yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, I'm really grateful that you are on BookTube, Bart.
thank you.
And I love your content. For those of you who haven't watched Bart's channel, you all got to check out both of these channels, by the way. And yeah, so we're coming up on an hour and a half. Do you all feel like you got your questions all answered? Are you all feeling good about the
Well,
chat? Uh,
really quickly, we've done a little highlight on some of our videos, and I have to do a highlight for Bart, because Bart,
Okay.
I found you, like, I'm going to say almost a little over a year ago. You popped up on my feed when a particular member of the booktube community got found out, and you did a video on it, and you were one of the few people who actually talked about it. And then later on, I just started watching your journey through science fiction as you like found things to love and not love. And one of my favorite videos of yours is actually your like vlog video where you like walked around New York City
yes.
and you read your books. And I had been thinking for a long time about doing a vlog video and if people would like it or not. And I was like, oh, look, Bart did it. Now I don't have to. And it was awesome. I loved like walking around your day and seeing how you read your books and like hearing all of your thoughts. And I think that video for me was one of your best, just because I really, really enjoyed that
Oh,
one.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed shooting it. Jimmy Nuts was actually, he started doing vlogs recently, and I watched a couple of his. He's amazing, and so he was an inspiration for me. But I had such a good time. Like, actually, if you do decide to shoot a reading vlog, and you connect your reading experience, but also your surroundings, it just opened up my eyes to all these things in New York that are, good, bad, whatever. But I was walking around New York, enjoying being here. so much more with the camera, shooting those little clips that I inserted into the video. And then the reading experience was more fun. So yeah, so that's awesome. I did have a question for both of you, really, but I know Joanna, you do a lot of journaling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if with your reading experience, do you both take notes as you're reading? Because I just kind of read a book and then I'll put the camera on. I have no notes. I'm not scripted in any way, and it probably shows. But I wonder how much preparation goes into your videos.
Well, I have a whole reading journal video that I posted earlier this year.
Okay.
That, by the way, Whitney helped me give me feedback about. So that is my approach. And so I'll just go ahead and share it with you very briefly, though. So I started this approach last year in October and have been doing it every single day, except for when I've been traveling. And that is, I have a plain notebook. And what I do is I draw a line for a margin, or you could just use margined paper, either way. And every day I make a point to read every day. Of course, I read every single day, usually in the morning. And then at some point during the day, after reading for a bit, I will write out my thoughts on what I read. And I try not to be too careful about it. I mean, I'm just kind of vomiting on paper my thoughts just for a page. So this usually takes me about 5 minutes a day, honestly. And sometimes I'll tab or highlight some things in my book. If I'm reading on Kindle, I'll highlight, or if I'm reading physically, I'll tab. And I might go and look briefly through the tabs to see if there's any specific points I want to write about. But then after I write that little passage that day, then I'll go through what I read, or I'll read through what I wrote. And in the margin area, I will write out specific themes or keywords that came out in my journal entry. So I might say something like plot, or I'll talk about I'll say the specific theme like grief, or some kind of keyword that comes up in the entry. And then when I finish the book, I might not go back and reread every single journal entry I wrote about the book, but I'll go back through the margins and look at the keywords, and it'll remind me of the specific things that happened for me in the story, or things that resonated for me in the story.
Okay.
And then I usually, this is an added step, and I'm usually terrible about doing it right after I read a book, but I do try to write a written review for myself, and I have a separate journal for that. And it's usually it's a really bad review because I write it in ink and I don't edit, and I just write. And then that usually prepares me. So that's my preparation for talking on camera. But I don't script my videos. I often think I should because when I edit my videos, I think, gosh, you are a mess and you don't even know how to complete a certain thought or whatever.
Believing that.
So I mean, I really wish I were better spoken. I mean, you were just talking about Jimmy here, and I feel like Jimmy is he's one of the best when it comes to speaking eloquently on camera. He started doing his wrap-ups live on camera,
Yes.
and he just doesn't miss a beat. He doesn't miss a beat. He's able to just flow beautifully in his language, talking about the experience of the book. And that's something that's really hard to do. And that's something also that Vera started doing. And it's also so really well spoken about too. I know she doesn't think she is, but she's great. So yeah.
Vera, if I may, Vera was asking earlier, it's just between me and Vera now. Mokotów Służew nad Dolinką is where I'm from in Warsaw. So just quickly to answer the question.
Yeah. And here's Philip Chase humble bragging because he doesn't script his videos, but of course he also speaks so beautifully off the cuff. He has some bullet points. Yeah. and BellTube, he just puts on a blonde mullet and then nobody cares what he says because then he just, has a great blonde mullet on. No, I'm just joking. Brian, you speak well too. So yeah. And by the way, Vera says here that she's close to you. That's pretty cool.
Well, I'm in New York right now, but I'm originally from Warsaw, from that part of Warsaw. So.
Wow. I think, Vera, if I'm not mistaken, you're in Ireland now too, right? Or in Ireland as of now. But that's really interesting, just how we can get connected to people that are nearby. Yeah, it's difficult to speak on camera, at least for me. Yeah, but I have often thought that. I'm like, man, maybe I should just start scripting my videos, but I feel like I would come across like a robot if I did that. So I'm kind of scared to do that too.
What about you, Whitney? Do you script your videos or?
Nope, I do not. And I constantly tell Joanna, like, poor girl, like, I'm constantly thinking, man, I would have such an easier time editing if I scripted my videos. I'm kind of a mess. There's a reason why I edit so much. Let's start with that. But I guess most of my videos, I just have like a million notebooks. And when I finish a book that I think has a particular theme that's very similar to something that I've read before, or I'm looking for a particular kind of book and I can't see or find a video that someone else has it, that's usually when I just write it down in my notebook. And so I have a notebook full of books that are very similar themes or things I'm looking for. And then eventually I'll come up with a list, and that bullet pointed list is then what I do my videos on. And I think I have started a couple of times now, so I don't have 50 shoots for one video. I have started writing down just a couple of sentences or going back and looking at my Goodreads reviews or things like that to try to help me before I start my videos, because like taking 50 shots for one video is starting to get to be too much. So
we've been there.
That's how I'm improving. When I finish my books, I really don't annotate. Joanna is like a way above and beyond. She's so much better than I am about that. I just finish a book, and then I will usually write down some kind of Goodreads review. Usually the reviews are for me, though. They're not really for other people, which I kind of feel guilty about sometimes. And then those reviews are what I use to remind myself about different aspects of the story. And sometimes I get lazy, and like now I haven't finished like 5 or 6 different books that I just read. So,
well, sometimes they're for us though too, because sometimes I look at your Goodreads reviews and it helps remind me of what you think about a book, or I just ask you. But
yeah, that's easier. But I did try, not Joanna's way, but I did recently try this particular year to do some buddy reads on my channel. And I did actually do some annotations where I started with the book Gateway, and I put in a sticky note at the end of every chapter. And I just tried to write down a couple of important points or a summary or like what happened in this chapter. And I did that for all 4 books that I did buddy reads on. One of them was Mercy of the Gods, which is why I can talk intelligently about that one. Because I sat down and like really went through the plot points and what I struggled with and what I thought they did well and what I didn't. And for books that I'm struggling with, I think I'm going to start doing that every now and then. Maybe not every chapter, though. It's a lot. But anyway, I hope that answers your question.
I'm very passionate about my journaling method, because I used to actually annotate, and I used to actually write in the margins. I did that for my Dispossessed book when I read that earlier this year. Like I actually wrote notes in the margins and underlined sentences and did all that. And I found that it wasn't as effective for me as actually doing my journaling approach. And it took way more time. It took a lot of time, I think, to stop and underline and write. Whereas when I do my journaling method, it takes me like 5 minutes a day. And then it adds up over time where I have some really solid thoughts that come together. So I'm a big believer in my method. But yeah, I think there's a lot of value in being able to write things out. A lot of people are saying here that they like doing bullet point methods, like Jared and Vera and Philip have all talked about that. John, he says he doesn't script and he doesn't know what the heck he's saying. He speaks so well, though. He's so good. So yeah, it's just I don't know. Either way, though, I think that any of these methods, whatever method works for anybody, it's just, even if you don't have a channel or whatever, like I just think it's always good to find some way to engage with the book more, even if it's just having a conversation, like you were saying with your Discord and everything too.
Yeah, I will also say another way, if you don't like annotating, is getting a buddy reader. I've been really surprised, and that's actually how Joanna and I met, is we did kind of a post buddy read of 11/22/63 or 69. Oh gosh, I always get that
63. Yeah.
And just had like a good discussion about it, like at the halfway point and then at the end. And sometimes like rethinking out your opinions can really help. So I think buddy reads are another good way to do that.
We did that, and then we also talked retrospectively sort of about Kenneth Lee's Electric Forest, which
Yes.
was unbelievable. What an incredibly underrated book, right? Like,
Mhm.
amazing.
Oh, that's what I'm going to put on my list. I have not read that, but I remember you talking about it.
It ends up being science fiction, but you don't think it at the beginning.
Okay. I like that.
Yes, that's a good point. It does feel like it's blurring the lines a little bit, especially at the beginning. Well, no, I would say, I mean, it does have a certain sci-fi vibe to it, I would say in some ways though, because it does take place.
I feel like it solidly is about technology.
Yes. And it does take place like on colonized planets in the future. You know, when I was talking about that earlier in this episode, how that seems to be a common theme in sci-fi, one in which I wonder if that's where we're going. Who knows if we'll end up on Mars someday or on a moon or no longer be on Earth as humans. It's something that I wonder about.
Yeah.
It's explored so much in science fiction. But that book it's something that it's going to be a hit or miss book for people. I guarantee you people will love it or they will hate it. There will be no in between, but I personally loved it. And it was so much fun talking with Whitney about that book. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, buddy reads are amazing. I've done a few, and they were a lot of fun. So I agree. The Inverted World I read as a buddy read, and that was such a good book because I had all these ideas, and I was of course wrong about everything as I was reading it. But it was so much fun to have someone reading it with me to talk about, and we were like nightly discussing the book, and then also Clara and the Sun, which I know we didn't talk much about, but I know you, Joanna, read and really enjoyed as well. I did that one with Jonathan and Robin from Bookspin as a buddy read, and that was so much fun as well. And I do find that when I do that, in lieu of maybe journaling, which I should start, or taking notes, I'm able to retain more of the book and kind of dive even deeper into it by having someone to bounce these ideas off of. So I think buddy reads are a lot of fun for sure.
That's a good point because I did buddy read Clara and the Sun with Jimmy here and with Murphy. And so Jimmy, Murphy, Napier, and I buddy read that. And we also buddy read Never Let Me Go recently.
Yeah.
And I did not journal about those books when I read them because I had them to talk to when I was reading them. And so having that back and forth is a good way to it. I think, like you said, to have further discussion, to engage with the book a bit more. And I feel like, I mean, I know that's, well, I guess we're all nerds here, so it doesn't matter if we're all here talking about books on a Saturday afternoon. But I just think that engaging with books or talking about books is just such a great way to get more out of a book. And I find my enjoyment level almost always increases if I'm able to engage with the book more deeply, be in conversation with it, either with myself in the book or with other friends or other people. So
yeah, I have definitely had buddy reads flip my opinion of a book.
Oh, wow.
I wasn't enjoying it. And then the more we talked about it, the more I was like, oh man, this is actually really cool. This is actually really cool. Okay, I'm having a great time. So
yeah, getting somebody else's perspective can be eye-opening. I agree.
Yeah. And by the way, speaking of buddy reads, I'm in a buddy read right now of Wars of Light and Shadow by the one and only Jenny Wirtz, who's here in the chat. Thank you so much for being here. And she also says that was well said, Bart, about buddy reads.
Thank you. And I want to say one thing before I forget. You were talking earlier about your need to have something not scripted, but those notes on camera when you're shooting videos. I just have to say, Joanna, that your Cersei Lannister video was so amazing. You had so much fun with it. I think you should totally go a little bit into that direction, a little bit more. I'd love to see more of that because that is still one of my all-time favorite booktube videos. I was so unexpected also for you, I thought, because you're always very like, you know exactly what you're saying and you're sharp and that video had so much fun.
Thank you so much. When I didn't even have to script that because I took the direct quotes out of A Song of Ice and Fire.
But you were acting, the facial expressions, everything. That was a lot of fun.
I did act a long time ago. I don't feel like I've ever been a good actor, but I had so much fun with that video, and I feel like I I know. I feel like people. I know my friend Alan makes fun of me all the time for being part of what he calls the intelligentsia and being a book snob. And but honestly, my favorite people on BookTube are people who don't take themselves too seriously. I love having good fun and humor, and both of you do that, by the way. Loved Pico in your last video, by the
Oh
way.
yes, you should have Pico all the time. I love
I
dogs.
know.
I have 3 dogs myself. In Colorado, we
Oh,
have 3 dogs,
mhm.
but Pico is so cute. Oh
Yeah,
my
he's
god.
such a little funny guy. I honestly put that in there because I was a little bit of a coward. I was like, I don't want people to think that this is my personal political opinions. Instead, I'm gonna make this all about voting for Pico. So
Yes,
Yeah.
Pico.
That
Yeah.
was a great video, Whitney. But also, I have to just mention your video from Scotland. I really enjoyed that one. That was so much fun.
Yes.
Such a well done video, and it made me want to go next year. We should all go. I think it's in
That
Seattle next year.
library, by the way.
oh, I
Oh,
know. Isn't it?
beautiful.
It was gorgeous. I was
Yeah,
so lucky to go.
it's a great
We should
place to go.
all go. I would love to meet people in person. That would be so
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, we
You
should
were
talk
saying
about that.
that you went out to lunch with a viewer at Worldcon?
Yes, I did. I did. And I got to meet so many authors and it
You
was
met George R. R. Martin. Oh my
I did.
goodness.
He was
Yeah.
reluctant, right? You said,
Yeah, well, he was, and I don't know. I kind of chickened out and didn't ask him the question everybody wanted me to ask him, but
right?
Would ask him that.
I feel like he would get mad,
You
and
would
I just
probably
don't
be so
want to be
pissed
that
off.
guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
No, I would not ask him that. I
Yeah.
feel like he probably gets that asked. I'm
He gets it
surprised
all
he
the
even
time.
comes out in public out of fear of that question.
I'm surprised that he was just wandering around by himself, like it was no thing, just wandering around, and there was no line. People were acting like it was totally normal. It kind of freaked me out a little. I was like, is that guy right? That like what? It was really cool. I'm really glad I went.
He should be writing.
Yeah, he should be, but I mean, I'm going to say a very controversial thing that I know Joanna's probably mad at me about. If I was George R. R. Martin, clearly not, but if I was, knowing how upset the fans were about the final season,
It's horrible.
and also knowing that I'm 80 and I'm very rich and I'm enjoying the fame, why would I finish the series? Why? Like, why not let it go, die, let someone else deal with the problem, and just enjoy the rest of your time? I know it's controversial, just putting it out there. Why would you finish
Well,
it?
legacy, I don't know.
I never thought about that before.
He's gonna upset somebody somehow, some way. So why? Why would you finish it?
Well, I think if he had a strong ending, if he knew how he wanted to end it, he would finish it. I think
Right. Or the ending he did give to them, and it was so poorly received. So either way he goes,
yeah.
like why worry about it? Like he has no incentive to finish this. I think that he's not going to. I mean, clearly I don't know. I did not discuss this.
That's so interesting. Like I honestly, I've just never thought about that particular question or that angle of things.
I just think I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just think if he was to approach the writing of the last book as art, if this is really art to him, my brother's an artist, by the way. I'm in his space, so I'm always around. I think that's a different approach. You're not doing it for money. It's something that has to come out of you. So I don't think he would, if he looks at it from that point, if it's still in him as art, then it has to come out. Even if it doesn't work for everybody, even if it upsets people, because the endings are tricky. I mean, Stephen King, I love Stephen King, but a lot of his endings were crappy.
Yeah.
But you still gotta go for it. You gotta have the guts. Come on, step up to the plate. That would be my thing.
I mean, I'm not saying
I get what
that's
you're
my
saying.
opinion. I'm just like putting it forth,
That is such an interesting. I have to go ahead and read some comments here because this is just. I'm just floored by this perspective, Whitney.
I know
kind of broken my brain.
Back again. I'm so sorry.
But I have to say, and I know my friend Jimmy here, who's the huge A Song of Ice and Fire fan. It's still like I know it's his favorite series of all time. It's still up there as one of my very favorite fantasy series of all time, even unfinished. Now, what would an ending change that or not? I think it would be good for him to finish it, even if it ends like a Stephen King poor ending. Well, Stephen King can do both.
Yes,
He certainly did a good job, in my opinion, of
the
11/22/63.
best ending of Stephen King's.
Mhm. Yeah, and so I feel like it I feel like it might, even if he does poorly with the ending, even if it tanks, I don't think it's gonna ruin my love of that series, is what I'm gonna say. 'Cause I can't imagine it taking away from what that series has already done for me. But Jimmy does say here, "It's much better that you didn't ask about wins." That's so many good questions to ask him that have nothing to do with wins. Like, why no more Windhaven with Lisa Tuttle? Interesting. And then Jenny Ward says, people who knew George R. R. Martin before Game of Thrones, when he wrote SF, he typically wandered around cons. He's approachable. Yeah. And I know that Johnny Wirtz, I believe, has met him before at some of those. So, and then Monty says here, I am one of 2 people on the planet who did not have issues with the last season. And yeah, so some people didn't have issues with it, but I don't know.
Well, 2 people.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, 2 people, and one of them's here in the chat.
Yeah.
And then Brittany here says, "Yeah, but I'm sure George's ending will be much better than the show's." And then Dave says here, "Perhaps the ending is the friends we made along the way."
Aw.
Aw, capricious fox. Can't wait for that for the news that Whitney convinced George R. Martin to write more sides. I noticed that too. You also asked him to, hey, while you're sitting around, why not write some sci-fi books? Those of you who love your sci-fi are all for that. So
FYI, he wrote some pretty good sci-fi books. P.S.
which ones do you recommend? If I pick up a sci-fi book by George R. R. Martin, do you have a recommendation?
I'm gonna have to think about that. Let me come back to you.
Sure.
I will tell you that I really enjoyed the book Nightwings, which was recently turned into a little miniseries. I think it was by Netflix or something, and I have yet to watch that. So
Yeah. Wouldn't it be fun if Game of Thrones, if he does put out the book and it ends with aliens like landing and it turns into science fiction? That would be a pretty cool ending. Unexpected.
The walkers were just first contacting the whole time.
So, no spoilers for Wars of Light and Shadow by Jenny Wirtz, but there have been some surprises in that series that point to things that I think could be a little sci-fi-ish.
Okay.
I'll just leave it there. But
poor Jimmy, he's correcting me because I suck at talking. It's Night Flyers.
Oops.
I'm so sorry. Thank you for fixing all of my problems. See, this is why I should script, honestly. I'm so sorry.
He says here, no worries. I'm the king of, or queen of mispronouncing words anyway. So, Sand Kings is incredible, as is Dying of the Light. Okay. Good to know. Good to know. Maybe I'll pick up some sci-fi. I know that my friend Kyle is planning to do a whole entire project where he's going to be reading a lot of other works by George R. R. Martin next year. So yeah, let's see. Trying to think. Okay, so here Monty says that maybe the last episode had problems. Yeah, I certainly there were still strengths even up until the beginning of the last season, I would say. An artist is driven to create, and you should never try to make everyone happy with you. So I vote finish George, and that's from our friend John from Talking Story. Yeah, not his ending. He gave 5 points. None of them, but Bran was his. Interesting. This is known info. Also, he has the need to finish from an artist perspective. That's what a lot of people are saying.
Why did you hear? Like, I did ask him if he was upset about the end of the show and the fan disappointment with the show. I did ask him that. That was the only question I really asked him, other than what it was like to be famous. And he said they got what they paid for. I have 0 ideas of what that means. 0.
Did anybody have an idea in your comment section? Or
nobody had an idea. Nobody actually really commented on George R. R. Martin really on that video very much. So other than I was going to convince him to write science fiction instead, and the final book that he was going to come out with, like on his deathbed, like, oh, he's finally publishing a book, but it's sci-fi. Thanks, Whitney. Like,
I'm
Well,
so curious now.
I think he was talking about whoever was writing the last season for HBO. HBO got what they paid. Maybe he feels that the writers were not strong enough. Whoever was writing script, I don't know. That's the
That
only thing.
actually makes a lot of sense, Bart. I hope that's what he
I
meant.
hope he wasn't referring to viewers, right? Because
Right.
yeah, that wouldn't make sense.
I agree.
Interesting. That's so interesting. Jenny Wirtz here said that his original outline for Song of Ice and Fire series was published online. Interesting.
Ooh.
So, yeah, it's just interesting to speculate what he meant by that. Um, they didn't really pay for it, so that's his way of saying they shouldn't expect a good show for nothing. uh,
Yeah, I don't know.
interesting. I don't know. I don't know what all that is. Yeah. So interesting. It's just so cool that you got to meet George R. R. Martin, though, and then that you couldn't get away from Alistair Reynolds.
Yeah, you
That's
needed
wild.
a bathroom break to
Yeah.
get away from him.
That
Yeah.
was
That was kind of embarrassing. I almost cut it out. I hope nobody thinks that reflects poorly on Alistair Reynolds because he was a perfect.
No, not at all. It was cute. It was
it
nice.
was.
It was nice that he was so, clingy. That was good. I like
Yeah.
Alistair. Have you read anything by Alistair Reynolds, Joanna?
I have not.
Okay, House of Suns is one I would recommend.
House of Suns.
I mean,
Okay.
there's a lot of Revelation space, but House of Suns.
I did not like House of Suns. I know. Feel free to send eggs my way. I understand.
What would you recommend then, Whitney?
I have only read one other book by him. I'm hoping to really I'm hoping to read actually Revelation Space next year, but I really liked the book Pushing Ice. That was the only other one that I've read by him. I'm hoping to fix that. Every book that he writes looks fantastic, though. Like, they always have beautiful covers, and they always sound fantastic on the summaries. So maybe I'll like it more when I get his style down a little better. Maybe starting with House of Suns was my problem. I don't know.
Something I'm thinking about doing more when it comes to sci-fi is one, because I read, I think I mentioned this earlier, but I read The Word for World is Forest by Le Guin earlier this month. And I loved it so much. And I loved The Dispossessed. And since some of her sci-fi books, I'm sure there are some that are chunkers that I'm not thinking about, but some of them are fairly short. Like Late of Heaven isn't terribly long.
Well,
yeah,
they're all
Late of Heaven
novellas.
is short.
They're what?
They're novellas.
They're novellas.
Like Word for World for Forest is a novella.
Is a novella, yes.
Then is a novella. Like, so she did some really fantastic work with such short amount of pages,
Yeah. I guess The Dispossessed is maybe an exception because it's a little bit long. It's full
Maybe
novel.
400 pages. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same thing with Left Hand of Darkness.
Is
I
it
think you would
longer?
enjoy that book, the character development there, the friendship that develops. It's a fascinating book, especially for the time when it was written, and the gender discussion there. I think is really interesting. But Word for World is Forest was also excellent. I like that book.
I
a
loved
lot.
it. And actually,
Avatar was based on it, basically.
yes, I think I heard that. I
Yeah.
would also recommend this to fantasy readers. Some parts of it, especially the Ashians, sorry if I'm saying the name right, it just reminded me of like a fantasy type of culture somehow. And so I feel like a lot of fantasy readers would love this, but I am thinking about either reading more Le Guin, maybe reading Left Hand of Darkness, and maybe even reading all the Heinous Cycle books, especially because they are shorter and I can insert them between the epic fantasy I read. And then maybe eventually get to the Earthsea books, which I know my friend Philip Chase is a huge fan of, who's here in the chat. And then maybe do a comparison video at some point about Le Guin and her fantasy versus her sci-fi.
Mm-hmm.
That would be an interesting.
And the Heinous Cycle can be read in any order also.
Yes, I love that.
Left Hand of Darkness, which I think is the second book that she wrote, easily. And obviously you just read The Dispossessed also recently. And that wasn't written as the first one, but it's basically the first one chronologically, because that's kind of where we're developing the technology that later on connects all these worlds.
Right, the Ansible that's mentioned in here. Yes,
Shevek is developing that.
And Jenny Word says there's an alternate title to Word for World is Forest, wasn't there? I think Rocannon's World, I could be
That's a
wrong, but
different
I
book.
think that's a separate story.
That's
I
book
want
one.
to,
That's book one in Hayner's cycle, Racannon's
yeah,
World.
that was the first story that she wrote. So this is
Yeah.
written at a later time, or
Yeah, it
maybe,
looks like Goodreads does say Ricannon's World is a separate story,
Oh
but
yeah, I read it.
I do think several of her books and novellas have had alternate titles. So they don't always make those very clear on Goodreads, and I wish they did. So you have to be careful because sometimes you pick up a book and you're like, wait, I've already read this one.
yeah. Yeah, I would love to read more of her, but then I also want to read more Butler. And so if you read this part and you continue
Yeah.
with the Lilith Brood novels, even though this was a normal novel length, it was, let me look at the page length here. It was 283 pages. It's still not terribly long, and it reads fairly fast, in my opinion.
Mhm.
Reads a lot faster than any of the epic fantasy I'm reading right now. So
No,
if
I'll
you
get to
continue
it.
that, let me know because maybe we can do a discussion on it if you're interested at some point.
Okay.
If you're interested, no pressure.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
pressure. I'm not
I'm
adding to your
totally
TBR or
interested.
anything. But just since you mentioned that you were interested in the series. But yeah, so I am just thinking I really want, especially at my love of that Tanith Lee book that we read together last year, Whitney. I would just love to explore more female science fiction authors. I know you recommend one that's a huge chunker, the Floating Worlds one. uh,
Well, I only recommended that one specifically for you because it had a lot of the similar themes, and she writes in a very similar style to Le Guin, and it's one that not a lot of people have read, but it is a big chunker. And I don't know, I have a couple other ones that I would definitely recommend. I mean, let's be honest. And this goes for you too, Bart. I hope you don't mind me saying this, even though we don't know each other very well. I am down for some buddy reads. Like, it helps me so much to like talk about the books, even if we have opposite opinions, to like really think about why things work or don't work for us and to read stuff. So if you have some books that you're interested in having a buddy read, I am so down. Like, love buddy reads, love it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the culture series you mentioned, I think that you read only one of the. Did you read the first one, Consider Fleabas, or
I actually read Player of Games.
Player of Games? Okay, so
Because
I
of
read.
your recommendation, I really want to get to Consider Phoebus, and I also own Use of Weapons.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe in the future we could read one of those. That would be those are fun. I think
would
culture series is an amazing projection of possible future for humanity. A very positive, utopian, slightly post scarcity future, but I'm enjoying it so far. I think Ian M. Banks, his writing really appeals to me. So
I will not lie. When I heard you talk about the culture series, it made me so eager to get to it. But then I got scared because then Whitney told me that they do get quite a bit chunky as you go on. And that
yeah,
intimidates. I'll be honest, like book length, I know that sounds crazy, but it does intimidate me a little bit. Just
but
because
you're not as junky as fantasy books. You know that Brendan Sanders. How his next book is going to be probably 1,200 pages.
I know.
These are maybe like 450.
Right.
You know, and some of them are slimmer. So
Yeah.
yeah,
For sure. Ada Palmer. That's a name I keep on hearing about lately.
yeah.
Have you all read, is it Terra Ignota?
Aragnata.
Yes. Bart, didn't you have her book on your TBR list? I feel like I was gonna put a comment for every book that I was excited about you reading, and then I was like, I'm gonna put a comment for every single book you bring up. So I couldn't do that because I don't want to be that annoying. But I was so excited that you're gonna read those books. I'm really pumped.
I'm looking forward to seeing how they work for me, how they resonate. But it seems like a fascinating world as well. So there's just so much to read. It's amazing. And somebody I think Dave Anderson in the chat earlier, this was a good comment. He said that it was interesting that the 3 books of Ursula K. Le Guin's in a row. Yep, one Hugo, Dispossessed World. So that's very impressive too. And those are all amazing books. And Lathe of Heaven is another one that I love by Ursula K. Le Guin. That's a great one as well. She's amazing.
She is an incredible writer. Yeah, she was.
I
Absolutely.
would also add a plug. I haven't read it yet, but I've read quite a few of her nonfiction essays or her introductions to other books.
Okay.
And she calls me out. Like every time I read some, like it was an introduction to another book. I do believe it was the book We, I think. It was my translation of We. I don't know. She had this really incredible, I mean, it was like a 3-page intro to this book, and it really called me out about how it's easy to name a dystopian. It's easy to fight against a dystopian, but it's really hard to actually change and do something about it. And that's why we enjoy reading them. And I felt super called out by Ursula. She has some really incredible essays that are available for free online if people are ever interested, because like she was just an incredible lady.
So my friend Philip Chase, who was in the chat earlier, he always recommends her essay From Elfland to Poughkeepsie, which is all about style and prose and the importance of fantasy prose. And it's an excellent essay. It's so good. I even had my mother read it and she loved it. But I also, yeah, I agree with you. She's so good at writing essays, and like she did the forward to Roadside Picnic, and
Yeah.
it's excellent. That forward, it's spoilery, so don't read it until you read Roadside Picnic, but it's an excellent essay. It's so good.
Yeah, maybe that's the one I'm thinking of. I don't know, but she really does some great introductions. Oh man.
Yeah, I agree about that.
I mean, she's just amazing. And the shorts, and one of my all-time favorite short stories is also her short story. I forget the title. Those who leave Amalas. I forget.
Yes, my
But
friend Jared Henderson, who was in the chat earlier, I know
oh
he
yeah,
wrote about that in his Substack recently.
did he?
Yeah, and I know Philip
Cool.
talks about, he teaches that in one of his classes, his English literature classes.
Yeah.
Gosh, I wish I could find it, but
It
yeah,
points to the price that we pay for our comfort that we live in such a powerful way, and it's so short. And you could also find it, like you Whitney said, just for free online. If you just Google it, you don't have to buy anything. You can just read it online.
It's it looks like Janie Wirtz has the title there. Those who walk away.
oh, thank you.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Walk away. Yes, those who walk away from Omelas.
I have heard nothing but fantastic things. I need to look this story up because I have not read it yet. So
Yes. Philip says he's still here, that he loves that essay. Yes. I'm just like, I'm on a Le Guin kick right now. And I just mentioned Jared Henderson. He did a fantastic Ursula K. Le Guin retrospective video. And I highly recommend that. But I am curious to read more of her books, read the Earthsea books maybe, and then do a comparison, like I said, of her sci-fi, and just read more female sci-fi authors in general. So more Octavia Butler, and then maybe Ada Palmer, possibly. I'm not sure, depending on the length and density of her books and what I could do right now, because I'm committed to a lot right now.
And if I can just jump in off topic totally, but since you have Philip up on the screen, I did start listening to the first book in his trilogy, because I've heard you guys talk so much about the amazing narration, and it is really good. And I don't usually listen to books because I find myself that my attention wanders. Yeah, Alan, I'm very impressed.
That's
the beginning of the book sounds really intriguing, so I'm definitely gonna read it. And like I said, I do need to read more fantasy anyway, or I'd like to read more fantasy. So this seems like a great place to start that. So.
That's wonderful. Yes, and I know that Philip is so pleased with the narration. My good friend
really
Ellen from Library of Alexandria, who is the person who inspired me to get on BookTube, by the way. But yeah, he did a phenomenal job. I actually do need to listen to that audiobook. I have it, so that is in my TBR plans as well for audiobook listening. I'm the same way.
I just listened to a free preview. I'm gonna get the whole thing, and I was in love right away.
Yay! That's amazing. Fantastic.
So Joanna, I remember seeing some time ago your first video that you posted were you like kind of tricked into starting a channel? That the origin story? Because you just mentioned Alan.
Yeah, I always give Alan the credit because the reason I give Alan the credit is because I used to be a BookTube lurker for many years. So I watched a lot of BookTube videos, but I never commented. I just was obsessed with watching the videos. My favorite thing to do would be to read a book and then immediately find the reviews and watch the reviews. And it was just so much fun. And I,
Yeah.
to this day, know there are a lot of lurkers out there on all of our channels. And I just want to say, if you're lurking here, I thank you so much for watching. Um, I appreciate you, and I understand if you're uncomfortable with commenting. Of course, I'm honored by anybody who comments in the chat or in the comment section of the replay, but I get it. I was there too. And then one day, I think I got the courage to comment on Alan's video, and he commented back, and I think something along those lines. But anyway, I connected with Alan and I felt so seen and excited that I ended up joining a Discord because of him. And then I started interacting with other content creators and other people in the community. And around that time was also when I found the wonderful Philip Chase as well, who is amazing. And he's also one of the most gracious people in the world, answering every single comment and just always answering so thoughtfully that I think I just felt excited about the community. And then I laughed one time because then I just started commenting all the time. And the next thing I knew, I looked at my YouTube account and it showed that I had a couple of subscribers. I thought, how do
Yeah.
I have subscribers? I've never posted a video. And I thought it was so funny that I just making a joke in the Discord one day. I said, haha, if I make it to the milestone of 5 subscribers, I'll do a Q&A video. And then I was just joking. I didn't mean it. And then people subscribed in that Discord and I got to 5 subscribers. So I thought, all right, give me your questions. And it was kind of a little funny because, most people do that for 500 subscribers or 1,000. So then, yeah, my first video is a really poorly edited and filmed Q&A video, but I keep it on my channel because, why not? And yeah, so that's how I started my channel. And then I kept going because, as you know, this community here on BookTube is just the best. It's the kindest community online. That's my humble opinion.
Yeah, considering all the problems, social media, and I have kids. My daughter is 15, the younger one, so I'm very well aware. And she grew up as my older one, Natalia, who's 20, did as well with internet and all the things we have, all the trepidations we have when kids are online. I think if more of the online world was like BookTube, it would be such a good place. Such a good, wholesome, comforting, uplifting, and funny also, and open to challenging conversations too, but in a positive way, and helping each other. Yeah, it's been amazing. So
yeah. So what about you two? What is your BookTube origin story? How did you start your channel? Like, why did you start your channel?
Whitney?
I don't have a great story. I was also a BookTube lurker. I remember finding BookTube and being like, what? There's a section of YouTube where they just talk about books. This is incredible. And I mean, exactly. It was changed my world. I gotta say, I probably quit watching TV shows. And I remember watching a bunch of people, and it's kind of strange, but I just would take a notebook and I'd be like, okay, I'm going to find 5 books that I'm going to read. And so I would just go through BookTube and I would find somebody who would convince me of reading this book or whatever. And then I would come back and I never commented because I watched on my TV, actually, like projecting onto the TV. So I don't know, at one point, this is kind of a silly story, but there's still a guy out there named Media Death Cult who did a lot of sci-fi, and his videos were just like some guy in a basement hanging out talking about his sci-fi books, and he had some sort of competition where he was getting all of his subscribers to submit all of their favorites list, like their top 10 favorites books and their movies and their TV shows. And he was going to put it all together. And I don't know, I was like, well, I'm not going to lose anything about it. So I did it. And then I liked watching it so much. And I had so many thoughts about what that was, that I was like, well, why don't I make a video talking about the books that I read and what I had to say? And I thought it was going to be like a silly little channel, like 200 subscribers or something. And here we are.
Now you're like a sci-fi powerhouse channel. Goodness.
And it's all because of Media Death Cult anyway, because he found me somehow and made me like part of his little group. I don't know. And it kind of just took off from there. So
I love that. He's got a wonderful channel. Love his channel. So, that's so wonderful that he embraced you as part of the community too. I love that. Yeah. So Dale says that 99% of the books I read come from BookTube, and yeah. So it's just that's a great. I think that's a great story, honestly, Whitney. And Dave Anderson here says that all grateful for your channels. I remember several years back discovering BookTube and looking for sci-fi booktubers with almost no success.
It's true.
And now there's a great community. Yeah. It's so true. I mean, it's evolved so much, even just in the last few years. I mean, BookTube has been around for a long time, like well over a decade now. But I mean, even before I started, I remember trying to look for Malazan Book of the Fallen videos, and I couldn't find any. Like, I found maybe one or two really obscure ones. And now it's like everybody says, if you've been on BookTube, you know about Malazan. I'm like, you didn't a few years ago. And now everybody talks about that series. So it's just amazing how much it's evolved over time. What about you, Bart?
Well, I mean, both of your stories are amazing. Lots of fun there. For me, I'm really not sure what sparked the idea to start a channel, but like Whitney said, I discovered BookTube and I was blown away. I just remember Netflix down, YouTube, BookTube. I was watching, and one thing that made it easier for me. So in my for my work, I'm in real estate. I own a small boutique real estate firm in New York. And years ago, I was invited to be on NBC's Open House New York show. So that was my first time with a NBC crew and a camera in my face. I was nervous, but I did the video. We were showing these properties, amazing homes, and I found it kind of fun. I did okay. So I started doing real estate videos. This would have been around 2010, maybe, when this happened. And over time, things became easier to shoot videos, of course, for real estate purposes, and we still do. In my office, we're very much technology forward, so videos are old news now. But there was a time where I was like the only person in Queens shooting videos. Don't search for them, please. But I was doing that. So then when I discovered BookTube and I started reading more science fiction, it seemed like when I would type in and I was searching for things about books on YouTube, fantasy came up so much, other types, but science fiction not as much. It was more difficult to find good content, and I figured, well, why not do it myself? And I initially did it. I really didn't think I would get any subscribers, but I wanted to do it more for kind of like a journal for myself of sorts, kind of just remembering what I read and putting this online. And also I was thinking that maybe this would help my kids read a little bit more, give them, the inspiration to pick up more books, because that is now, he's on YouTube talking about books. I was hoping that it would influence them a little bit. I think it helped my wife. She's been reading a lot more than she did in the past now. I'm not sure if my kids caught the bug as much, but yeah, that was the initial, and then I did get really good responses, and I found out that people do enjoy my videos also, and I've connected with so many people like you, and it's been awesome. So I'm super happy that I did it, but it really was more for me. I think it was just kind of something I was doing for real estate anyway. So I figured, well, I think the first video I did was for Tchaikovsky's Children of Time, which I really like. I think you, Joanna, would enjoy that book as well. Some slow parts in it. It's maybe could have been a little bit, but it's a great story. It's an awesome book. And when I read that, when I read that, I decided, well, let me just talk about it. So I think that may have been the first book review that I did, and it's been great fun.
That's awesome. I love that you went from real estate to booktube. What a journey. That's amazing. And for NBC and with NBC? Wow.
Yeah. And it was an NBC's show that I never watched, but they were looking for to come to Queens for the first time. This is where New York and Queens, where the office is. And I guess I don't know how they found. They Googled and called a few agents, interviewed a couple of people, and I got the gig. I guess I was good enough on camera for them to do it. So it was fun. It was fun to do, and it really kind of opened me up to thinking that, hey, if I can do it with the NBC crew, I can do it with myself, a tripod and a little camera. So yeah, that's my story.
Oh, that's an amazing story. I love that. Well, thanks for sharing that.
But I live in Colorado, so that's why I'm flying back and forth to New York for work. Like I spend a week in Colorado with my family, with kids, with the dogs, and then I come back, to New York. So it's a little bit difficult life, honestly.
Oh, okay. That's what I was wondering too. I had that question in the back of my head, whether New York was your home base or Colorado. So Colorado is your home base right now.
Yeah, Colorado. I lived in New York for a long time, but I live in Boulder in Colorado. I love it there. It's amazing. It's the best. 300 days of sunshine, high altitude also. I love mountains, climbing. So it's a great place. Mountain biking, skiing. So it's a great place to live. But the trade-off is I do spend some time apart from my wife, kids, my 3 dogs. So that is a little bit difficult. Like right now, I'm in New York, but it's what we do in life to kind of provide and also make the best sometimes of a difficult situation. And reading actually is amazing because when I'm here by myself, I do have so much more time to read. So it's when I'm in New York, I have my green screen. If you ever see the video and I have like a green screen, that's I'm in New York. If there's no green screen, I'm in Colorado.
That's what it is, because I'm always amazed with the green screen in your videos. Yeah. Okay. And that makes sense with the different settings, though. I did love that vlog, though, that we already mentioned earlier, though, you just got the whole rhythm of the city life in New York in that vlog. It was so well done.
It was fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, it's really hard being away from your family, but I'm glad that you get some reading time in. That's, good for us. So
for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I wanted to also say, awesome for Colorado. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I went to college in Colorado in Fort Collins, though.
No way! I didn't know that. How did you like? Because I've been to Fort Collins before. I went one time during New Year's.
Fort Collins is my favorite place. I'm sorry, Boulder. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. Fort Collins is awesome. It's not Boulder, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Good.
I have the New Belgium Brewery there.
Yeah.
I went there. It was a really happy place when I went way back then. So
was it CU Fort Collins?
CSU.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. I haven't been to Colorado in many years, but it is so gorgeous there. I've always said that I hate the snow, I hate the cold, but I could possibly forgive it in Colorado because it's just so beautiful.
Well, when I lived there, they just made it so easy to be healthy there. Like everybody does stuff outside. It's so easy. It's so easy to be healthy there. And in other places, it's not as easy.
Wow. Yeah. I wonder about that. Yeah. Because I know that statistically, I've heard that often about Colorado, that Colorado people are healthier and more outdoorsy. And there just seems to be more of a lifestyle of that. I don't know what it is. It seems kind of almost... It makes sense because there are such gorgeous, like you said, climbing sites, hiking, like you said, Bart, but at the same time, but it's so cold.
No, it's really not. It's really not because of the high altitude. Like Boulder is at over 5,000, 5,500. So you do get when the sun comes out, and in Boulder we have over 300 days of sunshine. It's warm. I mean, it could be cold. Like if you check the temperature on your phone, it could show that it's 35 degrees. But you're in your short sleeves and sunbathing
That's amazing.
all the time. As long as when the sun comes out, the snow disappears. It's definitely the same way. If you ever climb any high mountains, they go from extreme cold. As soon as the sun come out, they're taking everything off. It's very hot because of the atmospheric lack of, and just the altitude itself makes it that you heat up so much faster. So Colorado, sure, when it's windy and cold and overcast, it is very cold, but I feel it's colder in New York because of the humidity. Also, Colorado is much drier. New York has higher humidity, so you just feel it like it gets into your bones almost. Yeah, my dad has a place in upstate New York, and that's where the coldest temperature ever was recorded in U.S. So Colorado is much more south, actually.
You're going to make me want to move to Colorado because I
Yeah.
actually do think that's true. There is some
The
truth
sweet
to that because I live in the South right now. And when it gets cold, it doesn't get nearly as cold as some places in the country, especially like the Northwest or Northeast. I'm sorry. But it feels cold because of the humidity. The humidity it makes it feel worse. So
Well,
I
think of
can,
it this way: like the same temperature of air feels much different than the same temperature of water. Like 60 degrees, a day is perfect. But if you're in water that's 60 degrees, you are freezing. That's super cold. So, I
good
mean,
way to put it.
humidity affects it. I think maybe I'm, making some of that up, but
No.
I think that's true.
That
It
makes
is.
perfect sense.
It's
Yeah.
why traveling and packing for traveling is so difficult.
Yes, that's a good point. It is so hard to pack sometimes when you're
And
traveling.
you're like, okay, so I know it's 65, but is it like cold 65 or is it fine 65? I don't know.
Which, by the way, Whitney, I think I mentioned this to you before, but I love that, like, when you were talking about your travels, you're like, I couldn't take any books because, I only pack a carry-on.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
I love that. I'm like, yay, light traveling. My husband and I are the same. When we travel, it doesn't matter how far we go. We only pack like a carry-on. Like we don't like to check in anything. I don't know if that's different for you, Bart, because you travel all the time, but
I do travel all the time. Yeah, I have it down pat, and I have stuff in both places. So when it comes to this traveling, anyway, yeah, and Dave has a good answer, I think, to what we talked about as far as he says that water is a better conductor of energy than air, so it'll make you colder faster.
that makes so much sense. That's why I'm so miserable here when it's cold. I hate it. I hate the cold so much. But it really is that. I really do think it is the humidity piece that makes it worse or more miserable. Good
Yeah,
point.
and I mean, now we're like we've gone away from booktube, and now we're
I
in
know.
travel channel. But also just coming to Colorado. As soon as I land, I just like take a deep breath, and it's more relaxed. Everybody's nice, and New York, the fast pace of life in New York City. And as soon as I land at JFK and get into my Uber, and then hear people, honking and doing other things, it's a different lifestyle. So I love being in Colorado because of the people. Also, they're really, really nice.
Yeah.
Really nice
Cool.
people.
Yeah.
Have you, Bart, ever been to Tattered Cover?
Yes, I have been, of course, in Denver. They also have one at the airport, so I'm actually there every week. I pop in before yeah, it's a cool bookstore.
Yeah, the one in the airport is fine, but the real Tattered Cover, they have 2 locations now. It's really where it's at. Just saying.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm jealous because I don't have any unique bookstores where I live. Like I have Barnes and Noble, and I actually have one local bookstore, but that's about it. So I'm going to be traveling though next year. I'm going to London and then Paris. So
Ooh,
hopefully
I have recommendations for you.
Yes, I will take your recommendations for sure. Very excited about that because my husband said, "Is there anything you want to do while you're there?" I'm like, "I want to go book shopping."
Like 10 out of 10, it's not a secret. Will recommend. The best bookstore that I went to in London is the Forbidden Planet, but you have to go in the basement.
Okay. It's just so fun to try to go bookstore hopping in different countries or in different places around the world. Neat.
Yeah. Pack extra bags because like there's so many books to bring home. It's rough.
Oh yeah.
You're gonna have to bring an empty suitcase.
Yeah. Yeah, my husband is a master packer though. Like I kind of suck at packing. Sometimes I'll pack and it's just a big mess and I can't get it zipped. And then he's like, here, let me get at it. He takes everything out, repacks it, and it's like zips perfectly in their space.
Oh yeah.
So also it's
For
used
Janny in the comments, Janny Words is talking about foils. That is like Waterstones and foils are like the Barnes and Noble over there. Like they're very like department-y bookstores that are really fun to go into. Would recommend.
All right. I'm gonna have to write these down.
Mhm.
So foils and what's the other one again?
Foils and Waterstones are like their.
Right, I've heard of Waterstones for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
Barnes and Noble stole their like CEO or something. I was watching a YouTube
Oh, yeah.
video about it. Yeah.
Did it really? Barnes and Noble stole the Waterstone CEO?
Yeah.
Or is that
Made a huge improvement to and all the improvements you see, like Barnes and Nobles these days, kind of having their individual managers making decisions and people working there. That's from that person that Whitney's talking about. So yeah.
I have heard about that, like that they have some sort of model now where I guess the person, the manager at the individual store makes certain decisions rather than it being a larger corporate decision about what's being displayed based
Exactly.
on local
That
interests.
person will be more in touch with what locals like to read, and it's just it's been good. I think it was a great improvement. So I'm glad they still.
Well, plus, who wants to go into a Barnes and Noble and see the same books?
Right.
Like, you want to go into a Barnes and Noble in different places and find different books. Like, that's the fun of the
Yeah.
bookstore. So,
I had the most unusual experience when I was a graduate student. I used to go and study in the Barnes and Noble cafe, and I remember I moved states, and the weird thing is I always went to the one in one state, and then when I moved, I went to the Barnes and Noble in a different state cafe. And one time I was sitting in the Barnes and Noble cafe, and I suddenly just had this glitch in my head. I'm like, "Wait, what state am I in?" Like, it was really this weird mind glitch because I had been in regulars at both states and going back and forth, and I'm like, "Oh, it hurt my brain." But yeah, it's really interesting. Interesting that they're adopting that. I think that's really smart on their part.
Yeah, because it used to be like going to McDonald's. They try to make it uniform, but that was not a good idea.
Yeah.
that's not what they want. Not what book people want, I guess. So,
Oh, Forbidden Planet. Is that the one you were talking about too?
that's the one that I was talking about.
Yeah, with the basement. Okay.
Yep.
I'm having to write this down really quickly. Otherwise, I could just scroll through this episode, but just so I have it handy. Yeah, the original CEO and XO of Barnes& Noble retired, and they started out as part-time stock way back when. Very interesting. Not original, but before the Waterstones guy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm glad to have some bookstore recommendations. I'm very excited
You're gonna
about
have a
that.
great trip.
Yeah, I'm so excited about it. I really am. Well, you all, I have taken up over 2.5 hours of your Saturday afternoon. And I think I want to make sure that I give you enough time to enjoy the rest of your Saturday. But I've had such a fantastic time talking with both of you. You two are just, I heart both of you so much. Let's see if it works. My Apple thing is not going to work. But
Oh, it worked for me.
you got it to work. How come mine's not working? I have to do it the manual way, I guess. Let's see if I can do this really quickly. Oh, the reactions have to be on. That's the problem.
Oh, there
There we
you go.
So I love you both, and I
Thank
appreciate
you.
you taking your time to be part of my Why Read episode 33. And this was a really fun episode, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. Definitely check out these two channels. They are in the description below, especially if you want excellent science fiction recommendations. Check out both channels, of course. And we are going to go ahead and wrap things up. So thank you all so much for joining us in the chat or the replay of the video. Please comment down below. And yes, have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Bye.